Chapter 2762, Ancient Treasure. While the strange beast statue held Shifeng's attention, the other players patrolling and resting in the distance noticed the several dozen items falling from the sky. Their eyes immediately widened in shock. Crap, what's up with this loot? I've never seen so many epic items and legendary materials dropping at once. The boss is a level 128 superior mythic, so the epic items it dropped can definitely be used up to level 150. Despite making so many contributions to the guild, I only managed to get a pair of epic bracers that can be used up to level 130. With all those epic items, I could probably fully gear myself in epic items. Despite everyone being peak experts or better, they still grew envious when they saw Tedelia's loot. Rather, it was inevitable that they would be envious. Although epic weapons and equipment had become a lot more common in the current God's domain, the majority of them could be used only up to level 100. Those that could be used up to level 120 were few and far between. As for epic items that could be used up to level 150, even the various superpowers wouldn't have more than 30 pieces. This wasn't because the various superpowers were slacking on killing level 100 plus mythic monsters, but because mythic monsters only had a tiny chance of dropping epic weapons and equipment that could be used up to level 150. Now, however, Tedelia had dropped over 10 epic items. Needless to say, every one of these epic items would be good up to level 150. After all, Tedelia was a level 128 superior mythic. According to their past experiences, the epic items dropped by level 120 plus superior mythic bosses would almost certainly have their level limit set at 150. However, the epic weapons and equipment dropped were only the tip of the iceberg. What truly made everyone's eyes glow were the legendary materials in the loot. Legendary materials could be used to create customized epic weapons and equipment, which would definitely be top tier among epic items. However, like level 150 epic items, the drop rate for legendary materials was pitifully low. Even level 100 plus superior mythics would, at most, drop inferior legendary materials. More often than not, they would drop only epic materials. Nonetheless, Tedelia had dropped as many as 7 legendary materials. In other words, one could produce 7 customized epic weapons and equipment with a level limit of level 150. Not to mention, the 20-plus inferior legendary materials Tedelia dropped could also be used to produce top-tier epic weapons and equipment. In other words, Tedelia alone had essentially dropped over 30 level 150 epic weapons and equipment, more than enough to fully arm 2 players in level 150 epic items. This was something impossible even for the various superpowers at this stage of the game. As expected of a forbidden land. Just the loot of a superior mythic boss here equals the loot of 3 or 4 superior mythic bosses in the outside world. The loot's quality is also significantly better. Unyielding Heart also couldn't help his astonishment at this scene. At the same time, he resolved that once he reached Tier 4, he would absolutely bring a team here to explore the ruined mountain range. However, unlike everyone else, Shifeng paid no attention to the weapons, equipment, and materials Tedelia dropped. Instead, he stepped forward, collected a 1-meter-tall beast statue, and stored it in his epic spatial bag without hesitation. In Shifeng's opinion, even the combined value of all the other items Tedelia dropped couldn't compare to the value of this beast statue. Sacred Beast Statue, Soul-Devouring Beast. Epic rank, unique item. One of 12 stone sculptures of sacred beasts made by Skyflare Barstan. It holds incredible power. One shouldn't underestimate the beast statue just because it was an epic item. For Tier 4 players and above, this beast statue was easily 1,000 times more valuable than legendary items. An ancient god in God's domain, Skyflare Barstan was known as the god of elements by everyone. Legend had it that he could control all magic elements, and he was incredibly strong even among the ancient gods. In God's domain, any item belonging to a god would already be an amazing item, let alone an ancient god's possession. The 12 sacred beast statues were one of Skyflare Barstan's earliest creations. To both gods and ancient gods, these statues were trash. However, to Tier 4 players, these statues were priceless treasures. On the surface, the 12 sacred beast statues were only intended as room decor. However, if one placed these statues in areas with incredibly dense mana, the statues would generate a special signal. This signal allowed players inside the room to perceive the operating principles of a particular magic element. Although the granted perception was vague, it was still much better than blindly trying to feel and deduce the operating principles of the magic elements. Moreover, the effect stacked. With more beast statues collected, not only would one get to perceive more magic elements, but the intensity of the granted perception would also increase. In the past, a super guild had discovered an ancient god's treasury. And after working together with several superpowers and incurring countless casualties, the super guild had successfully raided the treasury. They had discovered 3 of the 12 sacred beast statues inside the treasury, one of them a medium-sized statue at the fragmented legendary rank. Due to these 3 beast statues, the super guild that found the treasury had ended up one of the 12 great guilds within a short period. Now, Sherfeng had merely killed a superior mythic-ranked realm lord, yet he had actually acquired a sacred beast statue. This was simply unbelievable. I really lucked out this time. Although not even one fragmented legendary item dropped, the boss actually dropped an intact legacy guidance crystal, besides one of the 12 sacred beast statues. If any of those superpowers in the past found out about this, they would most likely go crazy from envy. Sherfeng inwardly grew ecstatic as he picked up a crimson memory crystal from the ground. Normally, the legacy guidances players could obtain in Forbidden Lands were only fragmented crystals. Due to the instability of the mana inside these fragments, they would disappear after one use. However, an intact legacy guidance crystal was a different story. As the mana inside an intact crystal was incredibly stable, players could use it several times. Moreover, each use cost only 100 magic crystals. However, as these legacy guidance crystals were quite ancient, even a complete one could be used only 9 times. Regardless, an intact legacy guidance crystal was as valuable as a legendary item because it recorded far more information than a fragmented crystal. A single use of an intact crystal was easily worth 10 uses of fragmented crystals. In the past, some superpowers were even willing to exchange a legendary item for an intact legacy guidance crystal. However, nobody had ever taken up the offer. This was especially true for guilds and adventurer teams. After all, the legacy guidance crystal could lead to the birth of a Tier 5 player, which was way more valuable than a legendary item. In God's domain, unless Tier 6 God-ranked experts made an appearance, Tier 5 players would stand at the pinnacle of the game. The resources a Tier 5 player could acquire with their strength far exceeded the value of a legendary item. Several minutes later, Sherfeng finished storing all of the dropped items in his spatial bag. He then let everyone rest for an additional 10 minutes before leading them toward the Earthfall's secret land. Sherfeng had no choice but to position the still weakened members at the center of the team. He also had Ferbero open up the path for them, clearing out the level 125+ Great Lords and Grand Lords that assaulted their team on the way. He had no intention of resting whatsoever. "Commander, aren't we in too much of a hurry?" Solitary 9 asked in a whisper as he looked at Sherfeng, who still had a deathly pale complexion. The fight with Tadelia left everyone's concentration below the 10% threshold. They could fall unconscious at any time. Sherfeng was no exception. Yet, after resting for just a short while, Sherfeng had led them deeper into the ruined mountain range without hesitation. At this point, they had already been running for close to 2 hours, and everyone had constantly been fighting throughout this period. Moreover, the monsters they fought all had considerably high combat standards and high basic attributes. Although Ferbero took on most of the monsters for them, the occasional monsters still slipped by. And if they weren't careful, they would be easily overwhelmed by these monsters. "I know, but we don't have much time left," Sherfeng said while controlling Ferbero. Smiling bitterly, he continued, "At this point, I can no longer summon a second demon prince. If the duration of this one lapses before we reach our destination, we'll die a miserable death." Upon hearing Sherfeng's words, Solitary 9 looked at the endless monsters around them and got goosebumps. At the same time, he subconsciously raised his shield and stood closer to Sherfeng. If not for the demon prince, they would definitely be doomed. In fact, they wouldn't be able to cope with all these monsters, even with several Tier 4 experts on the team. After all, fighting in the Ruin Mountain range cost a lot of stamina and concentration. It was impossible for players to fight endlessly. Move faster. We're almost there. Shifeng urged everyone through the team chat after taking a look at his map. At Shifeng's words, everyone hurriedly closed the distance to Ferbero. The team then broke out in a mad dash while blocking the attacks coming from the surrounding monsters. After frantically advancing for another dozen minutes or so, the team finally discovered a huge cave in the valley, with an entrance several dozen meters high. The cave exerted a mental influence that rivaled Tedelia's, making everyone feel discomfortable. Guild leader Black Flame, is this the place you were talking about? Illusory Words asked anxiously. When she looked at the nearby cave, she got a sense of depression and uncertainty. A hint of fear had even appeared in her heart. If she was already experiencing such feelings even before entering the cave, it wasn't hard to imagine how dangerous it would be inside. Looking at the Godslayer's map, Shifeng said with certainty, "It should be here." But that mental influence. Unyielding Heart had goosebumps as he looked at the cave. If another monster like Tedelia emerged from the cave, they really would be on their way to the underworld. The mental influence is indeed considerable, but we went to great lengths to get here. We can't possibly give up now, can we? Shifeng also understood Unyielding Heart's worries. If they died now, it would indeed be a big loss. However, he had to obtain the Godslayer's treasure no matter what. In the worst-case scenario, he was even willing to use his final trump card. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Okay, let's go in and take a look. Unyielding Heart nodded. He, too, thought that Shifeng's words were correct. They had already gotten this far. It would be a pity if they abandoned the expedition. Not to mention, they still had the Demon Prince to guard them. If further progress was truly impossible, they could still escape. Following which, Shifeng and the others made their way to the cave. However, when the team walked through the cave entrance, a startling scene suddenly occurred. The instant Ferbero stepped into the cave, a red beam shot out from the cave's depths. Before Shifeng could even have Ferbero execute evasive maneuvers, the red beam had already pierced through the Demon Prince's body. After getting struck, the Lord of the Dead, who had been invincible up to this point, burst into a bundle of flames and vanished without a trace. Chapter 2763, God? He died? Shifeng was dumbfounded at the sight of Ferbero one-shot. Not only was that red beam unbelievably fast, but it even packed enough power to kill a demon prince instantly. Although the Bible of Darkness summoned only a weak clone of Ferbero's true body, this clone still possessed the physique of a bona fide half-step demon king. Even true Tier 5 demon kings couldn't slay a half-step demon king in one hit. As for the red beam originating from a barrier trap or magic circle, the likelihood of that was low. Any barrier trap or magic array would require its user to be present to display its greatest power. Without the user, barrier traps and magic arrays could, at most, trap someone. They definitely did not have the ability to kill the clone of a half-step demon king instantly. Not to mention, the beam just now didn't look like it originated from a magic array or barrier but more like an offensive spell. Everyone else present was also stunned by this situation, and chills spread all over their body instantly. What happened? That's a half-step demon king we are talking about. The demon prince that they believed was invincible had actually gotten killed instantly. If they took a similar attack on their Tier 3 bodies, they, too, wouldn't last a second. However, this still wasn't the crucial point. The fact that the other party could one-shot a half-step demon king meant that the other party was among the most horrifying existences they had come across. Meanwhile, none of these horrifying existences were things players dared to offend because the possible consequences in doing so included the annihilation of their souls. If that happened, they would really have to start all over again. However, before anyone could snap out of their daze, a terrifying mental pressure assaulted them. As if time had stopped, everyone froze in place. In fact, even their thoughts had fallen into a torpor. They simply stood still, not knowing what to do. While everyone stagnated, Shifeng clearly sensed something, and his heart immediately grew cold at this discovery. It's over. In his previous life, he had seen this time-stopping phenomenon only once in a video of a group of Tier 6 God-ranked experts clashing against an ancient evil god. The fight back then had been earth-shattering. However, aside from the Tier 6 God-ranked experts and a few Tier 5 experts, the other players present had no idea what exactly had happened. By the time everyone recovered, the battle was already over. For most of the players present, the battle had basically started and ended in an instant. To them, it felt as if nothing had happened whatsoever. However, that had been far from being the case. By the time everyone recovered from their stupor, 1/10 of a kingdom had disappeared from God's domain, leaving behind an endless wasteland littered with shattered space. Now that this scene was replaying before Shifeng's eyes, this meant that the other party was no weaker than that ancient evil god in the past. Just when the flow of time was slowing and Shifeng's thoughts were about to stagnate, a crimson glow suddenly bloomed from his spatial bag. The appearance of the crimson glow immediately dispelled the power enveloping him. Afterward, a shabby yet dazzling broken blade flew out of the spatial bag and hovered quietly in front of him. This is the Ash Blade. Shifeng was shocked when he saw this broken blade. Various legends were circulating in God's domain regarding the Ash Blade, which was rumored to be the God Slayer's weapon. A weapon named the Ash Blade had also appeared in Shifeng's previous life. Back then, the owner of this weapon had been a mysterious expert nobody knew. However, what everyone did know was this mysterious person's heaven-defying feat with the Ash Blade in hand. This mysterious expert had single-handedly annihilated a super guild's main city. Moreover, the Ash Blade this person wielded was incredibly powerful. Even epic weapons would break after suffering 3 or 4 hits from the Ash Blade. Only fragmented legendary weapons could barely withstand its power. For this reason, everyone had suspected that the Ash Blade was a legendary weapon. Hence, Shifeng had kept the Ash Blade all this time instead of discarding it. After all, there might be a day when he could recast it. Of course, there was another legend regarding the Ash Blade, which stated that the Ash Blade was a clue to the God Slayer's legacy. However, according to historical materials in the libraries of the various kingdoms and empires, nobody had ever found the Ash Blade. Only after that mysterious expert had appeared and thoroughly shattered the status quo of God's domain did everyone start paying attention to the Ash Blade. How interesting! Out of the people that arrived this time, someone actually brought that item. It seems you are quite lucky. While Shifeng was surprised by the Ash Blade, a deep and indifferent voice came from the depths of the cave. It used not the human language but divine language instead. Similar to the demonic language, despite Shifeng having no knowledge of the divine language, his brain still understood the meaning conveyed by the words. Before Shifeng could react to the divine words, an elderly man clad in a gray robe appeared before him. This elderly man's body was in a translucent soul state. Moreover, it was incredibly unstable, as if it would disappear at any moment. However, Shifeng could still feel great power coming from the old man, which awoke in Shifeng the urge to submit. The old man's information was thoroughly hidden. It was impossible to glean any information about him at all. Esteemed elder, we came here purely by mistake. We did not come here with any purpose. I hope you can forgive us, Shifeng said apologetically to the old man. He dared not display any disrespect to the elder before him. Although Shifeng wasn't aware of the old man's true identity, the fact that the old man could stop time meant that he was undoubtedly at the Tier 6 standard. Even if the old man was only a remnant soul now, he still wasn't an existence Shifeng could afford to offend. You don't have to lie. I know why you came here, the old man said as he looked at Shifeng quietly, his deep gaze seemingly seeing through Shifeng's soul. Not only did you acquire that map, but you even hold the Ash Blade. In that case, you qualify to enter this place and know its secret. How much you can gain from this secret will depend entirely on yourself. I am only an observer and the protector of this place. I won't do anything to interfere with your progress. Shifeng felt deeply relieved when he heard the old man's words. As for whether the old man was lying to him or not, Shifeng didn't care. After all, even if the old man was lying to him, Feng couldn't do anything about it. "Esteemed elder, may I know what will happen to my friends?" Feng asked worriedly. Although he himself was no longer in any immediate danger, he couldn't say the same for his teammates. It was entirely possible for the old man to erase their existences permanently to keep this place a secret. "Don't worry. I won't kill them," the old man said, chuckling as he glanced at Feng's teammates. "After all, they are individuals blessed by heaven. They won't die even if they are killed, right?" Feng couldn't help growing slightly nervous at the old man's question. For some reason, he had a feeling that this old man knew a lot of things. In fact, he might even understand the true existence of players. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked such a question. This was the first time Feng had met such an NPC. "Alright, I'll stop messing with you." Since Feng didn't dare respond to his question, the old man dropped the topic. He then said, "You hold the ash blade, which means you are the chosen one. Hence, you may enter the cave. As for the others, they will be teleported out of this place. Of course, as you have been lucky enough to get selected, you can also bring 9 people with you. However, you'd best think about who to bring with you. The secret of this place isn't something heaven-blessed individuals like yourselves can imagine. A single mistake might even result in a true death for you." When the old man said the words, "true death," he even placed emphasis on them. It sounded as if he was warning Feng, yet it also sounded as if he was teasing him. His behavior made it impossible for Feng to guess his thoughts. Nonetheless, Feng did not pay too much heed to the old man's warning. His goal in visiting the ruined mountain range was the Earthfall's secret land. Although he did not know what kind of secret the secret land contained, from what he heard, the 3 super guilds that monopolized the secret land had acquired a lot of benefits. This meant that the secret land shouldn't be a very dangerous place. "I've decided to bring the 4 of them. May I know if that is okay?" Feng asked as he pointed at Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle. "Only 4. After taking a glance at Lifeless Thorn and the others, the old man looked at Feng in surprise and asked, "Are you sure you don't want to bring more? You should know that the cost of entering that place is extraordinary. The amount of time you can stay there is also very limited." "I'm sure." Feng nodded. Initially, he had considered bringing more people with him. However, with the possibility of this secret being much greater than he imagined, every additional person he brought along would be an additional risk. Hence, he decided to bring only Lifeless Thorn's group of 4. After all, the 4 of them had long since known many of his secrets. They could truly be considered his people already. However, the Azura Adventurer team's other members were not as reliable. "Alright, this is your decision." The old man no longer pursued the matter and waved his hand at the 4 selected people. Apart from Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle, all the others immediately transformed into streaks of light and flew out of the cave. The streaks of light then left the ruined mountain range, dodging the purple lightning decorating the neutral map sky. Meanwhile, Lifeless Thorn and the others suddenly jumped up in surprise. "What's going on?" When Lifeless Thorn and the others saw their current situation, they fell into a daze. Just a moment ago, there had been nobody standing before them. In fact, even Feng had been behind them. However, in the blink of an eye, not only did Feng appear in front of them, but the rest of their team also disappeared without a trace. It was obvious that there was a blank in their memories. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Who was now, a scary old man stood before them. And they couldn't read any information about this old man. "Alright, stop looking around randomly. Your gazes are very annoying. Do you really think I can't sense them?" The old man suddenly shouted at Lifeless Thorn and the others, the brief pressure he exuded nearly making their knees buckle. "I'll let you off this time, but if you behave like this to anyone else, they won't be as easy on you as I am." Upon hearing the old man's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others hurriedly nodded and promptly stopped using their identification skills on the old man and their surroundings. "That's more like it. Now, follow me." The old man nodded when he saw Lifeless Thorn and the others turn obedient. He then began walking into the depths of the cave. Chapter 2764, Land of Fallen Gods. Outside of the ruined mountain range, devouring swamp. Dozens of streaks of lights descended onto a swampy woodland as Unyielding Heart and the others were transported out of the ruined mountain range. Were we resurrected? Unyielding Heart looked at his surroundings with some confusion. Why did we get resurrected here? Where's Brother Black Flame? The Devouring Swamp was a neutral map adjacent to the ruined mountain range. However, the map was very high level, with monsters at level 130 or above. It wasn't suitable for them to travel across. Hence, they had previously traveled through a level 120 neutral map to enter the ruined mountain range. I don't think we got resurrected, Illusory Words said, shaking her head. We were most likely teleported here, probably the doing of that horrifying existence we came across just now. Although she didn't know what had happened, the most likely possibility was that they were banished from the cave since none of them had lost any levels. Big Sis Illusory, aside from Black Flame, Azura's side seems to be missing 4 people too, Blue Gown said strangely after carefully inspecting the team. At Blue Gown's words, everyone else noticed that Lifeless Thorn and 3 others of the Azura Adventurer team were indeed missing. At this discovery, Azura's members couldn't help becoming anxious. Did they get left behind? Unyielding Heart subconsciously muttered a guess. At Unyielding Heart's words, everyone present felt chills crawling down their backs. Before they lost consciousness, they had clearly felt a frightening mental influence from the depths of the cave. If not for them losing consciousness a moment later, they might have dropped to their knees the next second. Without a doubt, the source of the mental influence was the most terrifying existence they had come across since entering God's domain. They found it truly hard to imagine the consequences of being targeted by such an existence. If that's true, this is bad. Illusory Words also frowned at this possibility. Against that kind of frightening existence, even a Tier 4 player like Feng would be no different from an ant. In fact, the said existence might even be able to obliterate their souls. After all, a few of the many frightening existences she knew of possessed this kind of horrifying ability. Not to mention, the existence they just met was many times stronger than any of those frightening existences. Let's reorganize the team and go back to take a look. Simply standing around and doing nothing isn't a solution, Unyielding Heart suggested. No, we cannot go back in, Illusory Words countered, shaking her head. Since that existence chose to keep them there should be a reason for this. Otherwise, why could we safely leave that place, whereas they couldn't? Moreover, we don't have the time to enter the ruined mountain range again. How so? Unyielding Heart asked strangely. Although Illusory Words' deduction might be correct, they couldn't just abandon Feng and the others without doing anything. After all, they didn't even know whether they had accomplished their task. If the task wasn't completed, their 3 guilds would be in big trouble afterward. I just received news that not only did the number of NPCs increase again, but the various powers members are also facing greater difficulties in leveling up. Shortly after we started sending our members into the secret Covenant Tower, the superpowers began having designs over it. They think that the tower is an excellent leveling spot, and they've already clashed with us outside Sky Spring City several times, Illusory Words explained. We need to head back as soon as possible to preside over the situation. Otherwise, it'll be impossible to seal off Sky Spring City with just a bunch of Tier 3 experts. They're taking action already? Unyielding Heart was surprised by this revelation. Initially, he thought that the various superpowers wouldn't pay as much attention to the secret Covenant Tower just for the sake of leveling. Hence, he hadn't anticipated such a development. However, the massive increase in the NPC population had undoubtedly increased the various powers' urgency and difficulty in leveling up. This made excellent leveling spots even more valuable than before. Now, just for the sake of leveling up quickly, many superpowers had already started targeting the secret Covenant Tower. If these superpowers entered the tower and discovered the Tier 3 legacies inside, the situation would definitely become even more troublesome. So, we need to return quickly to ensure nobody sneaks into Sky Spring City and the secret Covenant Tower. Otherwise, the various superpowers would have already occupied the tower before Black Flame completes his task. If that happens, we'll end up even more passive, Illusory Words said. She then took out a transfer scroll and immediately teleported to Crimson Emperor's residence in Silverwing City. After Illusory Words teleported away, the other Crimson Emperor members took out transfer scrolls and teleported to Silverwing City one after another. What should we do? Mu Lingsha asked Unyielding Heart as Crimson Emperor's members left. Do we return too? That's the only thing we can do. Let's just hope Brother Black Flame's side is safe. Otherwise, we'll have a difficult road to walk down the line, Unyielding Heart said, sighing as he took out a transfer scroll himself. Unyielding Soul's other members immediately followed suit one after another. As for Azura's members, they planned to remain in the Devouring Swamp and level up while waiting for their vice commanders to contact them before taking further action. During the time Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart had returned to Silverwing City to control the overall situation, Shifeng and the others in the distant ruined mountain range had arrived at the deepest part of the cave. Is this the secret of this cave? Shock and surprise filled Lifeless Thorn as he stared at the icy cavern before him. The icy cavern was over 12 kilometers wide. Its interior was a snowy white world, with ice sculptures in the shape of humans, elves, half-orcs, giants, dwarves, and other races erected all over. Every one of these ice sculptures radiated an aura that was stronger than the demon Prince Ferberos. Meanwhile, these statues numbered in the tens of thousands. Moreover, the dozen or so ice sculptures at the cavern's center radiated an aura that was much stronger than that of the other ice sculptures. Despite standing so far away, Lifeless Thorn still felt awe and fear in his heart when he looked at these statues. He dared not approach any of them. At this moment, let alone Lifeless Thorn, even Shifeng was astounded by this scene. Shifeng had a much clearer idea than Lifeless Thorn did of what kind of existence those central ice sculptures were. Indeed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Those dozen or so ice sculptures were bona fide Tier 6 gods. He had even read about a few of them in libraries. From the scene in the cavern, he could tell that these gods and people of various races had been going up against something. Only, the end result was that every one of them got frozen into eternal ice sculptures. What the hell happened here? Shifeng was greatly puzzled as he looked at this horrific scene. Tier 6 gods were existences that stood at the apex of God's domain. A force of over 12 gods could devastate the continent. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that such a force could even sweep through the dark abyss. In fact, even if all of the Tier 6 God-ranked experts that existed in his previous life joined hands, they could just barely manage to contend with a force of 12 or so Tier 6 gods. Yet, these Tier 6 gods had actually been killed, annihilated in a single move by the looks of. Chapter 2765, Godslayer's Legacy. After a brief silence inside the cave, a deep, emotional voice entered Shifeng's ears. You had best not ask or think about what happened in the past and what caused the deaths of so many of the world's powerful people and even gods. You also must not look into these matters. The consequences of doing so are not something even heaven-blessed individuals like yourselves can bear. You might even lose your minds as a result, the old man warned when he saw the curiosity on the faces of Shifeng and the others. Although the old man's voice did not carry any mental influence or coercion, the certainty in his tone made Shifeng shudder involuntarily. As for Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle, although they reacted fearfully to the old man's warning, the curiosity on their faces was clear for all to see. It was evident that they did not take the old man's words seriously. After all, this was a matter related to gods. Players who were new to God's domain treated the word God as merely a noun. At best, gods were a type of powerful monster to them. However, those who truly ventured around God's domain and studied the historical materials in the libraries of the various kingdoms and empires would realize that gods weren't just powerful existences. Simultaneously, they represented a kind of extreme, a road leading to the top of God's domain. Hence, anything related to gods represented a massive opportunity for players. This was especially true for Tier 3 players like themselves. They were quite aware that they could no longer advance on their own. If they wished to get to the next level, they would have to follow in the footsteps of their predecessors. Meanwhile, the footsteps of gods were undoubtedly the best to follow. None of you should look deeper into this matter, at least not now, Shifeng suddenly said to Lifeless Thorn and the others. He knew very well how attractive gods were to Tier 3 experts. They wouldn't hesitate to look into matters related to gods, even if the risks were big. After all, the road to promotion was simply too difficult. Normally, players could already improve significantly with the ruins left behind by Tier 5 existences, let alone those of Tier 6 gods. However, the disappearance of some peak experts and apex experts from both the game world and the real world most likely had something to do with Tier 6 gods. Anyone who tried to get involved with Tier 6 gods as Tier 3 and Tier 4 players would die before achieving anything. If they were lucky, they would have their accounts destroyed and need to start all over again. If they were unlucky, they might disappear like those experts in the past. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others eyed him curiously. They never thought that Shifeng would actively stop them from looking into this matter. "It seems you know your limits, kid," the old man said, gazing at Shifeng with warm approval. "That's right. Only people who know the limits of their strength and abilities can live long lives. Even you heaven-blessed individuals are no exception." At the old man's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others promptly awakened from their greed. "Thanks, Commander. I never thought I would get seduced by the benefits in front of me," Lifeless Thorn said in gratitude, a hint of fear in his voice. God's domain had always emphasized balance. All gains came with losses. If one tried to secure an opportunity despite lacking the necessary strength, they would only wind up dead. Currently, they hadn't even reached Tier 4, yet they were actually thinking of looking into the secrets of Tier 6. That was simply suicide. That is normal. After all, not many people in God's domain can remain calm when faced with matters related to gods, Shifeng said, shaking his head. If not for him having a wealth of experience adventuring in God's domain, he wouldn't have fared any better than Lifeless Thorn. In fact, he might have reacted even more crazily. In the current era where the gods had withdrawn from the world, even the various superpowers would go nuts over a clue related to Tier 6 gods. In fact, even Tier 5 NPCs would fight desperately to secure this clue. Alright, that's enough talking. After seeing that Shifeng and the others had calmed down, the old man beckoned to them and said, "Come here. Next up is the moment you have all been waiting for. It is also the final wealth and treasure that person left behind for you heaven-blessed individuals." A treasure left behind by the God Slayer? Shifeng grew a little excited at the old man's words. The God Slayer was a mythical figure in God's domain. Although it wasn't certain whether the God Slayer had become a god or not, it was certain that he was born a human. Meanwhile, the God Slayer was an existence that even gods feared. In fact, the number of gods the God Slayer had slain exceeded 10. However, for reasons unknown, the God Slayer had suddenly vanished into God's domain's history, leaving behind only a few clues pertaining to his existence. Normally, these clues were acquired from ancient ruins. It was almost impossible to find any records of the God Slayer in the various kingdoms and empires' libraries, as if the God Slayer's existence had been wiped out by history. Future generations couldn't look into the God Slayer's existence, even if they wanted to. However, there were a lot of negative comments about the God Slayer. Some people said that the God Slayer was a great sinner of God's domain, and others said that the God Slayer was the culprit behind the Twilight of the Gods. Shortly afterward, the old man led Shifeng's group of 5 to the cavern center, where the dozen or so frozen gods stood. Upon arriving there, Shifeng and the others noticed a space-time crack there, as small as a fingernail, undetectable from a distance. Only after moving within 30 yards of the crack did they barely notice it. Directly underneath this space-time crack was an incomparably complicated magic array. It was so complicated that even Shifeng, who was an advanced magician, felt dizzy after just one glance at it. Needless to say, he couldn't even begin to decipher it. This is the treasure? Solitary 9 was stunned when he saw this tiny space-time crack. For a moment, he even felt that the old man had duped them. What possible use could they have for a fingernail-sized space-time crack? Even if this space-time crack led to somewhere, with how small it was, players couldn't enter it. That's right. This is the treasure, the old man said, chuckling. You might think that such a small space-time crack is no big deal, but what if I say that it connects to the past? Connects to the past? Solitary 9 was again stunned. Crossing timelines was simply impossible. It should still be impossible even in a virtual reality game like God's Domain. Esteemed Elder, are you perhaps saying that this space-time crack can allow us to travel to an otherworld? Lifeless Thorn asked, thinking that the old man did not understand what the words connects to the past meant. In fact, even Feng suspected that what the old man truly meant was that the space-time crack allowed people to travel to a different space. After all, there were plenty of foreign spaces and other worlds in God's domain. No, it is really linked to the past. It isn't linked to an other world or a different space, the old man insisted, shaking his head. He could tell what Feng and the others were thinking, and he said in a determined tone, I know you don't believe me. There is no way you can believe me either. After all, time travel is something even ancient gods are incapable of accomplishing. However, it is true. Moreover, this space-time crack is connected to the ancient era of God's domain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The old man's words dumbfounded everyone present. Connected to the ancient era of God's domain? Feng felt his worldview crumbling, shocked beyond words. Could this be the Earthfall Secret Land's true secret? The ancient era of God's domain was an era of wonders. Various supercivilizations were intertwined during this era when gods still roamed the world. And because the twilight of the gods had yet to occur, the world of God's domain was incredibly rich in resources. The present era of God's domain couldn't hold a candle to the ancient era in this regard. I won't say anything more. Since this is your first time, you can enter it without any cost. However, you can only spend a limited amount of time inside. Moreover, the stronger you become and the greater your impact during the ancient era, the easier it will be for the world to notice your presence. If that happens, the world will reject your existence and expel you. What you can obtain during the ancient era will all depend on your own abilities, the old man said slowly. However, I have to warn you that the ancient era is not the paradise you imagine it to be. You will die a permanent death if you aren't careful. Before Feng and his companions could ask any questions, the old man waved his hand. Immediately, Feng and the other four transformed into streaks of light that plunged into the space-time crack, disappearing from the cavern. Chapter 2766, Ancient Era. In a valley amid some lofty mountains, a team of nearly 5,000 people frantically fought a group of demons. The battlefield was crazed and spectacular and looked just like a battlefield in ancient times. Both sides suffered severe casualties, their blood staining the valley red. The smell of blood carried for tens of thousands of yards. Even those inured to battle would find this situation uncomfortable and unbearable. However, neither side showed any intention of stopping, both prepared to fight to the bitter end. Of the two armies battering each other, the demon army was led by a level 135, tier 4 great demon, while a woman led the human army. The woman in question possessed golden hair and crimson eyes. She wielded a silver sacred sword and was clad in a knight's blue sacred armor. As the woman contended against several dozen level 130+, tier 3 demons, her HP continuously decreased. However, despite being at a complete disadvantage, the more she fought, the brighter the glow her sacred sword radiated. The power she exhibited also kept increasing. Damn it! You're actually using the aria of holy blood. Don't even think I will let you finish it. The tier 4 great demon's expression turned solemn when he saw the glowing sacred sword. Immediately, he spread out his 4 wings and flew toward the crimson-eyed woman. Everyone, protect the commander. Do not let that great demon approach the commander. A tall man shouted before rushing at the great demon with his golden shield raised. Subsequently, several dozen other melee classes nearby also charged at the great demon, all of them ignoring the fact that they were merely at tier 2. Scram! Seeing the crowd charging at him, The demon commander pulled out his crimson greatsword and slashed the space in front. Over 100 crimson beams shot forth, tearing apart space as they advanced. The power they carried simply wasn't something even Tier 3 existences could dream of withstanding. Boom. The next moment, the several dozen Tier 2 melee classes were instantly vaporized, while the shield-bearing man was sent smashing into the mountain. Damn it! I'll kill you! When a man standing nearby saw the scene, his eyes turned bloodshot, and he promptly charged at the great demon with his sword raised. However, before this man could even get near the great demon, the long-range spells of several Tier 3 demons had already killed him. In the meantime, blood had already dyed the body of the crimson-eyed woman fighting several dozen Tier 3 demons. Her complexion was also deathly pale. However, despite the state of her body, her gaze remained indescribably firm. "Be punished, demons!" the crimson-eyed female knight bellowed as she raised her sacred sword. The sacred sword released a beam of light that shot to the skies. Countless streaks of light then rained down on the valley like shooting stars, and the demons struck by these shooting stars immediately fell into a heavily injured state. The situation on the battlefield reversed in the blink of an eye. Kill. We cannot let these demons take even a step into human territory. The crimson-eyed knight shouted, her pale complexion showing no signs of fatigue. She then raised her sacred sword and charged at the demons who were still fighting. The female knight's words stimulated the surviving humans. They began madly fighting against the demons. However, after a few exchanges, the humans present were dumbfounded, staring at a distant pile of demon corpses in disbelief. The next moment, the great demon commander, who was over a dozen meters tall, emerged from this pile of corpses, a hint of mockery and contempt on his face. The aria of holy blood is indeed powerful. And for you to still be alive after using this desperate move, your mental willpower is truly astonishing. I'm certain you can rank among the top Tier 4 powerhouses, the great demon said as he looked at the crimson-eyed knight. He then asked mockingly, "But can you use it a second time?" At this great demon's words, the complexions of the surviving humans instantly turned ashen. This was the aria of holy blood they were talking about. This was the sacred sword Blood Moon's unique spell. Most people would be able to use it only once before departing for the netherworld. This was because the consequent pain of the body and mind was not something ordinary people could bear. However, in return for the steep price, once the aria of holy blood was cast, it exerted astonishing power. Even a great demon would sustain heavy injuries and lose half of their HP after getting struck by this move. Moreover, without restoration items such as the Water of Life, it would be impossible to recover from the attack. Needless to say, it would be impossible for the female knight to use aria of the holy blood again. However, with the humans' current combat power, they were no match for the great demon. After all, the great demon before them was a bona fide demon mark. The purity of his bloodline was far superior to that of ordinary great demons. Since you no longer have any other moves to make, it's my turn now. When the great demon saw the silent humans before him, an indescribably excited and joyful expression appeared on his face. Don't even think about it. The female knight suddenly appeared above the great demon's head and brandished her sacred sword. 3 phantom swords appeared in the sky, the sight stunning everyone present. This is the sword St. Lord Lox's personal technique, Sky Cleaver. The commander actually mastered it? When the surviving humans saw the 3 phantom swords in the sky, a look of awe and admiration appeared on their faces. You're already on your last breath, yet you're still putting up such boring resistance. When the great demon saw the 3 phantom swords, he did not reveal any awe or fear whatsoever. On the contrary, he nonchalantly brandished his great sword. Boom! The great sword and 3 phantom swords collided. The resulting shockwave sent both humans and demons stumbling backward. Large cracks formed on the ground the great demon stood on, and the great sword the great demon wielded let out a low hum. The great demon's arms were also trembling. Upon seeing this scene, the humans felt both encouraged and excited. Sure enough, a sword saint's personal technique was truly extraordinary. However, a moment later, everyone's joy turned into despair because the crimson-eyed knight hadn't fared too well either. Not only was her complexion paler, but even her pupils had begun to fade. It was evident that she was on her last breath. She could no longer fight. Ha! Amazing! Amazing! This is the first time I, Neiman Carlo, have seen a powerful Tier 4 human like you. The great demon burst out laughing as he looked at the female knight. However, it all ends here. Before you die, I will drag you all down to hell first. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After saying so, Neiman Carlo began chanting the incantation for the Tier 4 spell Hell's Gate. Suddenly, the sky darkened. A huge door decorated with skulls appeared, the blood-red glow from the skulls' eye sockets and the agonizing screams coming from the door seemingly telling everyone that their destiny was about to end. Even if the humans present wished to interrupt Neiman Carlo's spell, they couldn't do so, as the surviving demons were doing their best to stop them. However, just as the formation of the Hell's Gate was about to culminate, a spatial tear over 1,000 yards long suddenly split the sky. The resulting spatial storm not only disrupted the mana in the sky but even shattered the magic array summoning the Hell's Gate. Afterward, several figures fell out of the spatial tear and crashed onto the battlefield in the valley, their landings sending clouds of dust into the air. So, this is the ancient era? The man standing in the lead of the group muttered in amazement as he glanced at the world around him. Chapter 2767. You chose the wrong opponent. At the sudden appearance of Shifeng's group of 5, the whole battlefield immediately went silent. The humans and demons all stared at Shifeng's group with looks of surprise, confusion, or anger. Who are they? They came out of that large spatial tear, so they shouldn't be ordinary existences. Maybe they're guardians from the Holy City? However, their auras seem weak. Those people are also only at Tier 3. They shouldn't be the Holy City's guardians. Moreover, judging by their looks, they seem to be heaven-blessed individuals. The humans began a hushed discussion among themselves as they scrutinized Shifeng's group. Initially, they had held hope that Shifeng's group could save them. However, after noticing the 5 players' auras, they immediately fell into despair. The crimson-eyed knight peered at Shifeng's group with her blurry sight. It was evident that she, too, felt surprised and puzzled by the sudden appearance of Shifeng's group. Humanity's heaven-blessed individuals? When the great demon Neiman Carlo saw Shifeng's group, he, too, was shocked. How is this possible? Neiman Carlo wasn't particularly surprised to see more heaven-blessed individuals of the human race appearing in this place. What shocked him was the spatial crack that these humans had arrived through. That massive spatial crack had carried an extraordinary amount of power, even he would lose his life if he accidentally came into contact with it. Yet, Shifeng's group had actually come out of it directly. Compared to the humans and demons originally fighting on this battlefield, however, the ones most surprised by the present situation were Shifeng's 5. How is this possible? Shifeng's heart surged with shock as he looked at a group of people standing among the human army. Why are there other players here? Aside from the many NPCs, the human army also had quite a number of players. Moreover, the average level of these players was incredibly high. Even the lowest leveled among them was level 128, while some had even surpassed level 130. Shifeng was certain that he had arrived in the ancient era of God's domain. After all, the environment here simply couldn't be found anywhere in the modern God's domain. The mana in this land was so abundant that it was close to condensing into a liquid state. He could even clearly feel the magic elements in the air. Like sprites, some of the magic elements were cheerful and lively, some were cold and lonely, some were hot and angry, etc. He could sense all of this with exceptional clarity. Moreover, the NPCs on this battlefield wore significantly different gear compared to the NPCs of modern times. Their weapons and equipment were of much higher quality. In the modern God's domain, NPCs were mainly geared with epic weapons and equipment. Very few possessed fragmented legendary items. After all, fragmented legendary items were incredibly rare and precious even to NPCs. However, that was far from the case for the NPCs here. Every NPC had at least 1 or 2 fragmented legendary items. The female knight leading the human army was even fully equipped in fragmented legendary items. The sword she wielded was also a top-tier fragmented legendary weapon. Moreover, what was even more incredible was that Shi Feng had found someone he recognized. This person was none other than Yu Luo, a captain of the Heaven's Blade adventurer team, based on Dragonheart Island. Only, unlike the Yu Luo he had met on Dragonheart Island, the one he was looking at now was like a completely different person. Presently, not only had Yu Luo reached level 129 already, but she even sported an epic staff and a full suit of epic equipment. Although her epic equipment wasn't a set, her equipment standard was still ridiculously excellent. Unlike the last time Shi Feng met Yu Luo, though, the cleric looked much more haggard. She did not possess the aura and spirit of a peak expert at all. Guild leader Black Flame? Meanwhile, at this time, Yu Luo, who stood amid the human army, also noticed the 5 new arrivals on the battlefield. And when she saw that the man leading this group was none other than Zero Wings guild leader, Black Flame, her originally dispirited expression immediately became energetic. "Do you know them, Yu Luo?" the female oracle standing beside Yu Luo asked curiously upon seeing the latter's reaction. The female oracle was a level 131 player clad in a white dress, wearing a white priest's hat. Yes. "Moreover, he's my fellow countryman," Yu Luo said, nodding excitedly. "Fellow countryman?" The female oracle scrutinized Shi Feng's group. She soon noticed that the average level of Shi Feng's group was quite low, and their appearances indeed resembled Yu Luo's a lot. Particularly, the feeling of incompatibility Shi Feng's group had with the other players in God's domain was exactly the same as Yu Luo. The female oracle then shook her head and said, "What a pity. His luck is truly poor. He actually got teleported to this place." Upon hearing the female oracle's words, Yu Luo remembered the situation they were in, and her heart grew cold. The joy on her face promptly disappeared. The death penalty in the God's domain they were currently in was different from the God's domain on the other side. Players would not only lose 2 or more levels upon death but also fall into a mentally weakened state. Depending on the severity of the situation, players might even lose some of their memories. And worse, the use of resurrection spells could only mitigate the loss of EXP and not restore the lost memories. Moreover, even when resurrected using a resurrection spell, players wouldn't be resurrected on the spot but inside the life temple of a random main city run by humans. Of course, if players had registered themselves with a main city, they could get resurrected in the life temple of a fixed main city. However, Shi Feng's group had just arrived in this world. They definitely hadn't registered themselves with a main city yet. If they died, they would get resurrected at a random main city. Meanwhile, a great distance separated the main cities run by humans and there were no teleportation arrays in these cities. In other words, so long as Shi Feng's group died, Yu Luo was unlikely to meet him again. After all, humans had many main cities even in this world. Just the ones she knew already numbered over 500. As for the possibility of Shi Feng's group coming out alive from this battlefield, that was simply impossible. In the original God's domain, a group of Tier 3 players could still put up a fight against a Tier 4 Great Demon. However, in this world, let alone putting up a fight, Tier 3 players would be considered capable if they could escape with their lives. The reason for this was the incredibly high average combat standard of the monsters here. Monsters of the caliber of Great Demons would possess combat standards rivaling peak experts. However, the combat system of monsters was completely different from the realms of refinement players relied on. In skill and spell utilization, monsters such as Great Demons could display combat standards at the spiritualization realm without having to exert themselves. Such monsters were not opponents Void Realm experts like herself could hope to match. However, before Yu Luo could snap out of her daze, the Great Demon Neiman Carlo stopped paying attention to Shi Feng's group and shifted his gaze back to the Crimson-Eyed Knight. The Great Demon then looked at the dozen or so Tier 3 demons around him and commanded, "Go get rid of them. Please leave it to us, milord." The heavily injured demons nodded and flapped their wings. They then flew toward Shi Feng's group of 5, their speed greatly surpassing even Tier 3, agility-focused assassins. Not good. Those demon leaders are working together to target them. The level 131 female oracle was shocked by this development. She never thought that Neiman Carlo would have his trusted subordinates deal with Shifeng's group. Although these demon leaders had been heavily injured by the aria of holy blood, individually, they were still stronger than Tier 3 experts. In addition, if over a dozen of them worked together, they could form a demonic array that greatly increased their combat power. Big Sis Cloud, let's go save them quickly. Yu Luo urged anxiously when she saw the demon leaders targeting Shifeng's group. She knew that Shifeng was incredibly strong. After all, he was someone the various superpowers on Dragonheart Island had labeled a peerless expert. His strength surpassed even that of domain realm monsters. However, not only did the demons of this world possess high combat standards, but their demonic arrays also operated like the humans' battle arrays. Even a peerless expert would fall in the face of such a group of demons. Die, humans! Runes suddenly lit up all over the demon leaders' bodies. The auras they radiated also intensified significantly until they were just short of rivaling ordinary great demons in terms of strength. Simultaneously, the weapons in their hands turned into brilliant rays of light. Tier 3 combination skill, Skyflower's Shadow. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU immediately, countless red petals fell from the sky, heading toward Shifeng's group. Every flower petal tore space as they fluttered down, making it seem as if night was falling. You used a good skill, I'll give you that. Unfortunately, you chose the wrong opponent. Shifeng snorted when he saw the red flower petals descending toward him. He then unsheathed the abyssal blade and unleashed his aura. Simultaneously, a mana domain spread out from his body, instantly covering a 1,000-yard radius and enveloping the entire battlefield. The next moment, Yu Luo saw Shifeng execute an upward slash with the abyssal blade. Bronze combat technique, Swords Transmigration. Chapter 2768, Repelling Demons, Sacred Sword Blood Moon. As Shifeng swung his long sword, innumerable dazzling stars suddenly formed around him. Now that he had reached Tier 4 and had the assistance of a mana domain, this sword's transmigration was more than twice as strong as when he executed it at Tier 3. Boom! The next moment, the dazzling stars shattered the descending flower petals and attacked the demon leaders. Before the demon leaders could react, they were already flying back over 100 yards away, their HPs decreasing in large chunks. They even had difficulty standing up. Strong. He sent so many demon leaders flying with just one move. Could he really have been sent here from the Holy City? Tier 4. This aura definitely belongs to a Tier 4 class. He's a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. With that power, he's a powerhouse even among other Tier 4 classes. Everyone was momentarily stunned by this development. None of them thought that the seemingly ordinary Shifeng would send over a dozen demon leaders flying in one move. Moreover, he was even a bona fide Tier 4 Sword Emperor, an existence capable of rivaling Tier 4 great demons. Yu Luo, your fellow countryman, is so strong. No wonder you were so excited to see him. I never thought he would be a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. With that kind of strength, he can definitely rank within the top 5, or maybe even top 3 in our city, the female oracle named Cooling Cloud exclaimed as she looked at Shifeng. She, too, had not expected Yu Luo's acquaintance to be so powerful. The Tier 4 player. This was a goal players like herself struggled toward desperately. Unfortunately, the Tier 4 promotion quest was simply too challenging. Her one attempt had failed. In the main city she resided in, there were only 3 known Tier 4 players. Every one of them was a big shot in the city. They were existences far beyond Tier 3 players like herself. However, at this moment, let alone Cooling Cloud, even Yu Luo, who was familiar with Shifeng, was wide-eyed in shock and incredulity. Therefore, she had improved a lot after arriving in this world. However, Tier 4 remained a huge threshold to cross. Unless she could take one step further in her combat standard, she would be doomed to hover forever in the ranks of Tier 3. However, despite being at level 127, Shi Feng had already become a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Moreover, he had accomplished this feat even before entering this unbelievable world. Meanwhile, as the humans were goggling at Shi Feng in shock, the great demon Niemann Carlo gazed at Shi Feng with a solemn expression, as if he was looking at a monster. "Who are you?" Niemann Carlo asked, a hint of fear appearing in his eyes. "A heaven-blessed individual can't possibly wield such power." After Shi Feng unleashed his aura, let alone the demon leaders present, even a demon marquis like himself felt suppressed. In fact, even the mana flowing inside his body was significantly slower. Now, he could exhibit only 60% of his normal combat power, at most. Generally, suppressing a Tier 4 existence's strength by even 10% was already a difficult feat, what more 40%? Yet Shi Feng had done it. "That's none of your business." Shi Feng paid no heed to the great demon's question. Instead, he smiled and said, "I will give you two options now. The first is for us to continue fighting and determine the victor through life and death. The second option is for you to get out of my sight, together with your people." As soon as Shi Feng finished speaking, a deathly silence fell over the battlefield. Yu Luo and the other players, in particular, gaped, their wide-open mouths forming an "Oh, is he crazy?" Even if he's a sword emperor, Niemann Carlo won't spare him after being threatened in such a way. It's over. That Niemann Carlo will definitely go all out against us. Demons had always been arrogant in God's domain. They did not place other creatures in their eyes at all, even when dealing with the dragon race. Needless to say, the arrogance of a demon marquis was even greater. Even their commander, Angelica Teresa, would not dare utter such words to Niemann Carlo. After all, Niemann Carlo was truly powerful. His strength was outstanding even among Tier 4 demons. He had the potential to become a demon prince. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the commander of a demon army. Sure enough, after the demon marquis heard Shi Feng's words, Niemann Carlo's complexion turned indescribably ugly. Simultaneously, everyone felt the ambient mana grow violent. However, just when everyone thought a bloody battle was about to begin. "We're leaving," Niemann Carlo said, his mouth practically twisting. After giving Shi Feng one last glare, he turned around with clenched fists and instantly disappeared, leaving behind only a group of demons exchanging stunned looks. "What? He left. What's going on?" Everyone in the human army was dumbfounded at Niemann Carlo's departure. After all, even with the assistance of a Tier 4 Sword Emperor like Shi Feng, their army was still in dire straits. Yet, Niemann Carlo had actually left without saying another word. He behaved nothing like a demon at all. Angelica Teresa, the commander of the Night Legion present, couldn't help looking at Shi Feng strangely. She never thought that Shi Feng's words would carry such great deterrence for the demons. The great demons here are actually so smart? Cleansing Whistle was also surprised when she saw Niemann Carlo leaving. She knew that Shi Feng possessed the Bible of Darkness, which could be used not only to summon demons but also to suppress hostile demons. This was why Shi Feng could push back those demon leaders so easily. However, of those present, only Shi Feng knew what exactly had happened. The Bible of Darkness held absolute control over demons. Although Niemann Carlo did not know Shi Feng held the Bible of Darkness, the great demons still possessed an instinctive fear and dread of it. Moreover, Shi Feng had repelled over a dozen demon leaders with a single move. This aggravated the fear in Niemann Carlo. Demons were very smart creatures. After the first major update took place, demons would almost never fight battles that they were not confident of winning. Even if Niemann Carlo were significantly stronger than Shi Feng right now, the fear and dread he felt for the Bible of Darkness would deter him from casually starting a fight. After the demons left the battlefield, the surviving humans all breathed out a sigh of relief. They then began reorganizing their formation and treating the injured. A large number of people also gathered by Angelica Teresa's side with downcast and unreconciled expressions. This was because the female knight's mental state and soul had already reached the brink of collapse, despite her having a lot of HP remaining. This was clear even to the Tier 3 individuals present. "Commander, it's all our fault. If we weren't so useless, the commander wouldn't have had to use the aria of holy blood. Damn it. Someone in the city must have leaked information on our operation. Otherwise, Neiman Carlo couldn't have led an army to surround us. Both NPCs and players present expressed sadness when they saw Angelica's current state. It was evident the female knight was loved and respected by these people. Unlike players, it was incredibly difficult for NPCs to get resurrected. Big Sis Cloud, what should we do now? The commander won't last at this rate, Yuluo said while frantically casting healing spells on Angelica. However, healing spells worked on only physical injuries. They had no effect on damage to one's mental state and soul. Commander Angelica Teresa was the only hope for their main city's survival. In this world, both NPCs and players had difficulty surviving because this world was several times crueler than the modern god's domain. It was also because of Angelica that Yuluo had managed to live well until this day. There's nothing we can do. The aria of Holy Blood's backlash is too powerful. The fact that the commander managed to cast it once is already plenty amazing. Yet, after using the spell, she even used a taboo skill that placed a huge burden on the mental state. Now, even a Tier 4 Great Divine official can't save her, Cooling Cloud said as she shook her head, a gloomy expression appearing on her face. While the two Tier 3 healers, Yuluo and Cooling Cloud, were doing everything they could to save Angelica Teresa, Shifeng, who watched all of this from a distance, was filled with an indescribable sense of shock and surprise. She's actually Angelica Teresa? Shifeng couldn't help doubting his eyes for a moment as he gazed at the frail female knight. What's the matter, Commander? Solitary 9 asked curiously when he noticed Shifeng's surprise. In Solitary 9's opinion, there shouldn't be anything in God's domain capable of surprising Shifeng. Yet now, the man actually evinced surprise because of an NPC. This was a truly strange situation. Have you never visited a library to read about God's domain's history during your free time? Shifeng rolled his eyes at Solitary 9. She is the Angelica Teresa. She holds the title of Valkyrie and is one of the two founding elders of the Fire Dragon Empire. She's a founding member of one of the 4 ancient countries? Solitary 9 did a double take at Angelica Teresa when he heard Shifeng's words. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The 4 ancient countries of the modern god's domain were the only 4 human empires that had existed since the ancient era. According to legend, the founding emperors of these empires possessed incredible power. In the case of the Fire Dragon Empire, though, a large part of the reason it survived the ancient era was the contributions of its 2 founding elders, and even gods feared these 2 founding elders. However, by the looks of it, she seems to be dying, Lifeless Thorn said in a quiet tone. Maybe she just has the same name? No, she is definitely that person, Shifeng affirmed. The sacred sword Blood Moon is ranked 6th among God's domain's famed swords. It is said that this sword once belonged to Angelica Teresa, one of the Fire Dragon Empire's founding elders. While a person can have the same name, the chances are low that she would wield the same weapon. God's domain's 36 famed swords were unique existences, and their owners were all historical figures in God's domain. In other words, it was precisely because of the people wielding these swords that the swords became unique existences known throughout God's domain. What should we do now, then? If she dies, will it alter God's domain's history? Solitary 9 asked anxiously. At this point, he still couldn't tell whether they had arrived in the real ancient era of God's domain or just a replica. If it was a fake, then good. If it was real, then the results would be very bad. No sooner had Solitary 9 finished speaking than the system's cold, mechanical voice entered Shifeng's ears. Chapter 2769, Inferior Mythic Quest System. Warning. Warning. System, you have triggered an optional Inferior Mythic World quest. Quest content, assist Angelica Teresa to become Meteorite City's Lord. Rewards 1 unknown item and God's Domain World Authority +2. Penalties unknown. System, you have 30 seconds to consider. Quest will be accepted by default if no response is made. An inferior mythic quest? Shifeng couldn't help doubting his ears when he heard the system. As far as he knew, legendary main storyline quests were already the most challenging quests players could pick up. However, there were quests of a higher grade than legendary main storyline quests, Mythic quests, which had always been a mystery of God's domain. Despite the rumors of Mythic quests, nobody had ever personally verified their existence. Yet, he had now triggered an inferior Mythic quest. Do I accept it? Shifeng hesitated. This was most likely the only opportunity he would ever get to challenge such a quest. After all, he had never even heard of anybody receiving a quest of this rank. He had most likely triggered such a quest only because he happened to visit God's domain's ancient era and came across a key historical figure. Moreover, by the looks of it, the other players around him had not received this quest. This meant he had satisfied some unknown conditions to trigger this quest. Only, the penalty for failing a legendary quest was already more than enough to end a player's career in God's domain. The penalty for failing an inferior Mythic quest would most likely be several times greater. If he failed to complete the quest after accepting it, however, when he saw the reward of God's domain's world authority +2, greed momentarily overwhelmed him. In the present God's domain, everyone else was probably unaware of God's domain's world authority, as it was simply far too difficult to obtain. Normally, players had to have achievements that affected the entirety of God's domain to acquire this world authority. Players who successfully obtained world authority, even if only 1 point of it, would receive unimaginable assistance in their progression in God's domain. Just like the name suggested, gaining world authority meant one would become in existence with special rights in God's domain. The various superpowers were willing to go all out and risk incurring massive losses just to obtain the special rights the War God's Temple offered. After all, obtaining these rights meant one's guild could surpass other guilds by a large margin and solidify its position in God's domain. Individual players could also obtain special rights in God's domain. This was world authority. Obtaining even 1 point of world authority was equivalent to attaining God's domain's recognition. Players with world authority would then gain an unimaginable affinity with the world. On the surface, gaining an increased affinity with the world might not seem very useful. However, it would provide players with a clearer perception of the various magic elements and their operating principles. This was crucial for players aiming to reach Tier 6. In the past, for the sake of producing Tier 6 God-ranked players, the various super guilds were willing to do everything they could just to help a select few of their members gain world authority. However, even the 5 great super guilds had managed to gather only a handful of world authority points after struggling for 4 or 5 years. Nevertheless, it was also a fact that every player that obtained world authority points had reached Tier 6. Now that Shifeng had the opportunity to obtain 2 world authority points just by completing 1 quest, how could he not feel greedy? If he succeeded, let alone Tier 5, even getting promoted to Tier 6 would become a lot easier. "Commander, are you all right?" Yenya asked worriedly when she noticed Shifeng's strange expression. "Did you consume too much concentration after using that combat technique just now?" Previously, Shifeng had exhausted himself during the fight with Tadelia. Although they had taken a small break afterward, the amount of concentration he managed to recover was most likely limited. "I'm fine," Shifeng said, shaking his head. He then looked toward Angelica Teresa, who currently lay weakly on the ground, and gritted his teeth. "It seems I have no choice but to help her." Truthfully, he didn't wish to take part in this matter. After all, the old man from before had emphasized that if he overdid things here, the world would quickly discover his existence and forcibly return him to the modern world. If that happened, it would be a huge loss for him. After all, the environment here was truly wonderful. Moreover, God's domain's ancient era was far superior to the modern era in many aspects. The available legacies aside, just the materials, weapons, and equipment available here were already leaps and bounds superior to the modern God's domain. At this point, he had yet to find out how he could earn a large amount of resources from this ancient era, so he naturally couldn't recklessly take action. This was also why he had chosen to chase away Neiman Carlo instead of killing the Great Demon. Needless to say, he also wished to avoid saving the NPCs of this era if possible. This was especially true for a big shot like Angelica Teresa. Steady progression was the way to go in God's domain. However, the quest rewards were far too generous. Even if it meant taking a huge risk, Shi Feng still planned to give it a try. After all, in his current state, he really wasn't confident of getting promoted to Tier 5. If he merely relied on legacy guidances, constructing even a completely new mana body would be tough, let alone constructing a mana body that matched the physique of Tier 5 monsters. Ultimately, Shi Feng walked up to Angelica Teresa, his actions causing the other people present to grow alert. Although Shi Feng had repelled the demon army for them, he was still a foreign powerhouse. Their wariness of him was only natural. After all, there were many insidious people in God's domain who were capable of stabbing others in the back with a smiling face. No one wouldn't be completely safe from such people, regardless of one's identity. The best example would be their commander. Their commander possessed a great reputation in their city. Most of the city's big shots respected and favored her, yet she still ended up getting stabbed in the back. Upon seeing Shi Feng walk over, Yu Luo gritted her teeth and asked in a quiet tone, "Guild leader Black Flame, do you have a way to save our commander? So long as you can save the commander, I will help you with whatever you want. Even if it means sacrificing myself." In reality, Yu Luo did not think Shi Feng would have a way to save Commander Angelica Teresa. After all, even Cooling Cloud, who was both a skillful healer and advanced master alchemist, was helpless. "I indeed have a way to save her. However, I don't need you to sacrifice yourself or anything of the sort." Shi Feng smiled involuntarily when he saw the resolution on Yu Luo's face. "I just need you to tell me about the situation here once afterward." Even if Yu Luo didn't ask for his help, he would still save Angelica Teresa. After all, a dead person couldn't become the overlord of Meteorite City. "You have a way to save the commander, guild leader Black Flame?" Yu Luo was momentarily stunned by Shi Feng's reply. However, she quickly recollected herself and said excitedly, "No problem. So long as it is something I know, I will definitely tell you." On the other hand, Cooling Cloud, who stood at a side, was confused when she heard Shi Feng's confident reply. She was an advanced master alchemist, yet even she was helpless about Angelica's situation. She found it truly hard to believe a fellow countryman of Yu Luo's had a way to save the commander. This wasn't because Cooling Cloud was belittling Shi Feng and Yu Luo, but because the knowledge Yu Luo had shown regarding God's domain was simply too inadequate. Even her usage of skills and spells was crude. In addition, while it wasn't necessary for all healers to become a specialized master alchemist, it was still common sense for healers to know how to craft some potions. Yet Yu Luo did not. Hence, Cooling Cloud concluded that Yu Luo and Shi Feng came from some backwoods. Otherwise, they shouldn't lack such common sense. However, Shi Feng did not respond to Yu Luo's question. He merely took out a translucent crystal from his bag and passed it to her. "Have her eat this. She'll gradually recover once she does," Shi Feng said without further explanation. Yu Luo was confused when she received the translucent crystal from Shi Feng, not understanding how such a crystal could save Commander Angelica. However, when Cooling Cloud saw the crystal in Yu Luo's hand, she was shocked. "A crystal of souls? How is this possible?" At Cooling Cloud's exclamation, the other healers present stared at Shi Feng as if they were looking at a monster. "Big Sis Cloud, is this crystal of souls something amazing?" Yu Luo asked, bewildered. Realizing that she had lost her composure, Cooling Cloud quickly calmed herself, then explained, "The crystal of souls isn't just valuable. It is incomparably rare even on the scale of the entire God's domain. The Holy City's side can secure only a few of such crystals, as they are simply too rare. Normally, such crystals appear in places where souls gather, such as the Netherworld. These crystals can not only heal one's mental state but also strengthen the soul to a certain degree. It is impossible to purchase a crystal of souls on the market, and it is many times more valuable than even the water of life." "It's such a rare item?" Yu Luo was startled. She never thought Shi Feng would actually use such a precious item to save someone. With this, she would owe him a massive favor. "All right, you'd best save her first," Shi Feng said. When he saw the astonished looks everyone was giving him, he only shook his head and smiled. The crystal of souls was indeed precious. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be willing to use it. After all, he had to rely on himself to harvest the necessary monster souls to create crystals of souls. However, the crystals weren't so precious that he couldn't afford to waste them on others. After all, the soul orb was one of the 7 treasures that could easily produce crystals of souls. He merely needed to kill Great Lord-ranked monsters 5 levels higher than himself to obtain the necessary monster souls. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU at Shifeng's reminder, Yuluo quickly snapped out of her daze and helped Angelica consume the crystal of souls. Shortly afterward, Angelica's complexion recovered significantly. Although she had fallen unconscious after consuming the crystal of souls, one could tell that her condition was no longer critical. Now, all they needed to do was wait. By the time Angelica woke up on her own, she would be thoroughly recovered. Meanwhile, after seeing that Angelica was saved, Cooling Cloud, as a captain in the Night Legion, took the initiative to invite Shifeng's party to rest in Meteorite City, the main city they resided in. Shifeng did not refuse the invitation, as he was curious to learn more about God's domain's ancient era. The human army walked for over a dozen hours before eventually arriving before a stalwart mountain range. A city that was more spectacular than even the royal capitals found in the modern God's domain appeared inside the valley of this mountain range. Chapter 2770, City of Riches, Meteorite City. Meteorite wasn't just a gathering place in the Meteorite mountain range for humans to live and conduct trade in. It was also the safest location for humans in the Meteorite mountain range. After the Night Legion registered the information of Shifeng's party with the city, Cooling Cloud led the 5 straight into the city. Meanwhile, as Shifeng and his party members were non-residents of Meteorite City, they each had to pay an entrance fee of 5 magic crystals. Let alone Lifeless Thorn and the others, even Shifeng was stunned by this fraudulent price. Meteorite City's entrance fee was more than 10 times greater than the various guild cities, not to mention that of modern NPC cities. At this point, the market value of magic crystals had already risen to 40 silver per crystal. 5 magic crystals was the equivalent of 2 gold. Unless the city's mana had condensed into a liquid state, only a fool would pay such an entrance fee. However, from the behavior of the NPCs and players here, it looked as if they had long since gotten used to this situation. Even Yuluo paid the 5 magic crystals without hesitation. Guild leader Black Flame, this is the standard price here. Naturally, Yuluo could tell what was going through the minds of Shifeng's party. Smiling, she whispered, "But please believe me that this price is absolutely reasonable." Initially, she, too, had been shocked by this price. After all, she wasn't the guild leader of a guild, unlike Shifeng, but merely a team leader in an adventurer team. The magic crystals she had on hand had only numbered 200 or so. Paying 5 magic crystals just to enter a city had been an extravagant expenditure for her. However, after entering Meteorite City, she quickly realized that this price was definitely reasonable. Compared to the NPC main cities in the modern God's domain, Meteorite City could practically be considered a holy city. Of course, Shifeng wouldn't dwell on this matter. After all, 5 magic crystals was basically nothing to him. He was merely surprised by the absurd entrance fee. Afterward, Shifeng paid the entrance fee for his party of 5, then followed Cooling Cloud and Yuluo through the magic array that enveloped Meteorite City. This is a main city of the ancient era? When Shifeng set foot in Meteorite City, a comfortable feeling immediately enveloped his body. This comfortable feeling was different from the kind of comfort he felt when entering a place with high mana density. Instead, entering this city allowed him to have a clearer perception of the world. Particularly, his perception of the various magic elements had sharpened over twofold. When he had first arrived in the ancient era, he had already sensed a significant improvement in his affinity with magic elements. If he could train in the environment here, he was confident that not only could he break through his mana body's 100% threshold, but his efficiency in learning magic arrays, skills, and spells would also double or triple. This was a wondrous place for development. Nonetheless, the environment inside Meteorite City was actually significantly better than the environment outside. In fact, Shifeng even had a hunch that if he used a legacy guidance here, he could exceed his mana body's 100% limit in just a few days. The magic array protecting the city is personally crafted by a human saint. Not only does it have strong defensive properties, but it even improves the mana perception of the city's inhabitants. However, operating this magic array requires a lot of magic crystals, hence the entrance fee, Yuluo explained. Actually, Meteorite City's big trade market and huge population flow have already helped reduce the entrance fee. Some cities even charge 7 or 8 magic crystals. No wonder you managed to improve your control over mana so much, Shifeng said in realization as he looked at Yuluo. Yuluo had already unlocked her mana body's potential to 100%, and her control over mana had even reached the Master Magician standard. If her concentration standard reached Tier 4, she would be able to form her own mana domain and become top tier among Tier 3 peak experts. Most domain realm experts hadn't even reached the Master Magician standard at this stage of the game. And although Yuluo was very talented, she was still far from comparable to Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. Yet, even with his help, those two were still half a step away from becoming Master Magicians, so how could Yuluo possibly overtake them? The only explanation was the environment here. Mitchum. I've improved a lot after arriving here, Yuluo said as she nodded confidently. That's right. Yuluo has been improving rapidly during this period. Now, she can already rank among the Night Legion's top 5 healers, Cooling Cloud said, nodding. Although she didn't have a high opinion of Yuluo's initial strength, she very much acknowledged the cleric's talent. Actually, it is all thanks to Lady Angelica's teachings, Yuluo said. At the mention of Angelica Teresa, an expression of gratitude and admiration appeared on her face. It's a pity that we failed to complete the quest this time. Had we succeeded, Lady Angelica might have become the Lord of Meteorite City. If the city comes under Lady Angelica's leadership, the city will prosper and possibly even rank up into an advanced main city. Become the Lord? What kind of quest is she trying to do? Shifeng asked curiously. His inferior mythic quest had stated that he needed to help Angelica Teresa become Meteorite City's Lord. Now that a clue on how he could do so had appeared, he naturally was curious. It's nothing. Everyone in the city already knows about it at this point. Since Shifeng expressed interest in this topic, Cooling Cloud explained slowly, Meteorite City has been developing for hundreds of years already, and its population and scale of operation have grown significantly. However, at this point, the city has reached a bottleneck. The old city lord also abdicated recently. As one of the candidates to replace the lord, Lady Angelica Teresa wishes to improve Meteorite City. Meanwhile, there are 2 ways to help Meteorite City develop further. The first is to expand the city. However, the city's magic array was personally established by the saint, and nobody in the city is capable of modifying it. The only way to modify the magic array is to go to the holy city and meet with the saint. The chances of success are dismal. Setting aside how far away the holy city is, just trying to meet with the saint is already an incredibly difficult task. Hence, Lady Angelica can only resort to the second method, strengthening the magic array's core, which would, in turn, upgrade the magic array. Recently, we received news that a Tier 4 infant dragon appeared over at the Ghostfire Hills. If we can hunt this infant dragon and secure its dragon eyes and dragon crystal, we can strengthen the magic array's core. Only, at this point, Cooling Cloud sighed. Let alone hunting that Tier 4 infant dragon, they had already fallen prey to a demon army's ambush shortly after leaving Meteorite City. What followed next was what Shifeng himself had witnessed. Travel to the holy city to meet with the saint or kill a Tier 4 infant dragon. Shifeng shook his head and smiled bitterly at Cooling Cloud's words. Although he didn't know where the holy city was, since the NPC cities here had no teleportation arrays linking them, the journey to the holy city could easily take several months. Moreover, even after arriving at the holy city, it wouldn't necessarily be possible to meet with the rumored saint. As for the other option of killing a Tier 4 infant dragon, that was even more ludicrous. A Tier 4 infant dragon was in existence above even demon princes. It was an existence that could truly match Tier 5 existences. When Sherfeng was in his Tier 4 legacy land, even after reaching Tier 4 and gaining a Tier 4 legacy skill, he could only put up a fight against the Tier 3 infant dragons there. Even with the Heavenly Dragon Breath's help, he still couldn't kill those Tier 3 infant dragons. Now, Angelica Teresa actually had designs on a Tier 4 infant dragon despite being only at Tier 4 herself. Calling her actions suicidal would be an understatement. Moreover, killing the infant dragon probably had to be done as soon as possible. After all, dragons did not have the habit of living in a fixed location long-term. If he couldn't help Angelica kill the infant dragon before it went elsewhere, he would have to look for the elusive saint. Sure enough, this isn't a quest that can be completed easily. However, Sherfeng did not feel particularly surprised by this situation. A legendary quest was already monumentally difficult to complete. An inferior mythic quest would only be worse. He also had to admit that Angelica Teresa matched the legends, which portrayed her as a brave warrior who stood up against dragons. If Angelica succeeded in slaying a Tier 4 infant dragon despite being at Tier 4 herself, that would truly be a legendary feat. The only thing Sherfeng could do now was look for opportunities to improve both his and his party's strength. Otherwise, he would be utterly helpless against the infant dragon. Under Cooling Cloud and Yu Luo's lead, Sherfeng's party arrived at Meteorite City's trade market. When Lifeless Thorn and the others saw the dazzling items put up for sale, their eyes widened in shock. The basic currency used in the market here was actually the magic crystal. Coins did not exist here. However, they also had to acknowledge that the ancient era of God's domain was truly amazing. The NPCs here even sold epic weapons and equipment players could use. Only, the price was somewhat high. Even a random piece of level 150 epic equipment sold for 20,000 magic crystals. If converted to the gold coins used in the modern era, that would be equivalent to 8,000 gold per piece of level 150 epic equipment. While the various super guilds would kill to purchase level 150 epic equipment for 8,000 gold, it was a different story if the payment had to be in magic crystals. In addition to epic equipment, fragmented legendary weapons and equipment occasionally appeared in Meteorite City's auction house, which the various player forces in Meteorite City competed for. Only, one needed a minimum deposit of 300,000 magic crystals just to participate in the auction. Meanwhile, these fragmented legendary items usually ended up selling for over 400,000 magic crystals. Whether it was Lifeless Thorn or Sherfeng, they couldn't help feeling like they had become beggars after entering Meteorite City. Although Sherfeng carried some magic crystals with him, that number was only 50,000, just enough to purchase 2 pieces of epic equipment, at most, here. Of course, it was also much easier to earn magic crystals here than in the modern God's domain since the magic crystal was the main currency used in the ancient era. Whether one completed quests or traded materials with NPCs, payment was in magic crystals. Hence, local players found the prices of the epic and fragmented legendary items reasonable. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After walking around for several hours, Cooling Cloud bid goodbye to Sherfeng's party since she still had matters to deal with as a captain in the local Night Legion. As for Yu Luo, she stayed behind to serve as a tour guide for Sherfeng's party. Inside a high-class hotel in Meteorite City. Staying in one of the ordinary rooms here cost 50 magic crystals a day, while the high-end rooms cost 200 magic crystals per day. Sherfeng chose to rent a high-end room without hesitation. Shortly afterward, Sherfeng's party of 5 and Yu Luo sat quietly inside the room. Out with it. How long has it been since you arrived here? Sherfeng asked seriously as he looked at Yu Luo. What's up with the players here? Chapter 2771, Alien-like players at Sherfeng's question, an exceptional silence filled the room. Lifeless Thorn and the others simultaneously focused their gaze on Yu Luo. Ever since they arrived in this place, they had come across too many unknown and surprising matters. However, the only thing they could do was remain silent and quietly observe everything, including the so-called NPCs and players here. In their opinion, be it the NPCs, monsters, or players here, they all felt alien. This was especially true for the players here. Despite being players, the players here gave them a completely different feeling than the members of their party. It felt as if the players here were not players at all, but rather the original inhabitants of this world. It was as if these players had already accepted this virtual world as their own. To be precise, these players treated the world of God's domain as a real world. Moreover, judging by these players' behavior, they had resided in this world for a considerably long period. Otherwise, the alien feeling they gave off wouldn't be so conspicuous. This alien feeling was especially familiar to Sherfong. Looking at the players in this ancient era felt like looking at Phoenix Rain back when he met her in Flame Dragon City. It was just that Phoenix Rain seemed more alien back then than these people. She felt as if she was a player yet not a player at the same time. In short, she gave off a very strange feeling. Now, the players here gave him a similar feeling. Hence, the shock he felt when he met these players initially was much greater compared to that of Lifeless Thorn and the others. However, he couldn't openly state his feelings. After all, the matter concerning Phoenix Rain was of great importance. Moreover, at the same time as their party was finding the players here alien, these players had similarly noticed the strangeness of their party. It was evident that these players were foreign to players like their party as well. In addition, through the previous conversation he had with Cooling Cloud, Sherfong got the impression that they lived in completely different worlds. The old man in the cave had already stated that this world was the ancient era of God's domain. Logically, there shouldn't be any other players in this world. Yet, not only were there players living in this world, but there were even a large number of them. Based on his initial estimates, there should be well over 5 million players residing in Meteorite City. This was already on the level of royal capitals in the modern era. Meanwhile, according to Cooling Cloud, there were at least 500 such main cities on the continent. If Meteorite City was representative of these main cities, there should be well over 2.5 billion players in the ancient era. Yet, none of the various powers in the real world had an inkling that there were players playing in the ancient era of God's domain. That's right. Everything is as you guys have guessed. When Yu Luo saw the look everyone was giving her, her originally light and happy expression instantly vanished, replaced by a solemn expression. Whether it is this God's domain or the players here, both come from a different world from ours. A different world? Solitary Nine's breathing grew heavy at Yu Luo's words. How is this possible? Although he had already had suspicions, he still found it unbelievable after hearing Yu Luo's confirmation. While it was indeed true that God's domain was a virtual reality game like no other, it was still far-fetched to say that people of a different world were playing the game with them. No, it would be somewhat incorrect to say that they're from a different world. Shaking her head, Yu Luo smiled and added, to be precise, they are people living in a different world. What do you mean? Sherfong asked curiously. You should know of the migration plan that took place 100 years ago, right? Of course we know. Back then, due to a shortage of resources and the worsening environmental pollution, Earth had gradually become unsuitable for human life. Hence, a migration plan was executed. I heard that many people at that time were sent out to explore the universe for habitable planets. Solitary Nine answered, nodding. Could it be? Are you saying these players are the people who were sent out? Yes. They are the descendants of those explorers, Yu Luo said. Back then, Earth had already discovered several habitable planets. However, they were too distant from Earth, and the journey would take a long time. Hence, after gathering all of the world's power, several hundred interstellar spaceships with self-sustaining environments were constructed. These spaceships then set forth toward the selected habitable planets while carrying all sorts of resources and hundreds of millions of Earth's outstanding personnel. These people have been living on the interstellar spaceships for these past 100 years. However, these people experienced a much longer time than people on Earth during their journey. I heard that they've been living in space for over 600 years. Some spaceships have even experienced over 900 years of life. The population on these spaceships has also continued to grow over time, with the total population having exceeded 10 billion long ago. The original spaceships have also acquired resources from various planets on the way and modified and upgraded themselves. At this point, these spaceships can no longer be considered mere spaceships but more like interstellar continents. And they are still making their way to the habitable planets. However, as these interstellar continents had limited resources, the majority of their population can only reside in virtual worlds. Only a small minority has the privilege to roam the outside world. Hence, these people are accustomed to virtual worlds. The professional players of our worlds can't even compare to these people in this regard, as virtual worlds have long since become a part of these people's lives. After God's Domain's launch, the game became their everything. The understanding they have of God's Domain far exceeds ours. When Luo finished speaking, silence enveloped the room for a long time. Solitary 9 and the others even had their mouths hanging wide open. They never thought that they would actually be ignorant of such a huge matter happening outside Earth. They also couldn't even begin to imagine how it felt to live out in the open universe for several centuries. I see. After hearing Luo's explanation, Shifeng came to another realization. During his previous life, right before he reincarnated, God's Domain had suddenly launched an expansion pack for seemingly no rhyme or reason. It was the most special expansion pack ever added to the game. Normally, the main God system would first implement a new expansion pack in the game before notifying players about it. However, news of this expansion pack had spread in the real world before its implementation. In fact, even its name had been revealed beforehand. War of Worlds. The description that came with this announcement also clearly stated that there would be several worlds attacking the main continent of God's Domain. For the sake of their own survival, these worlds would wage war with each other on an unprecedented scale. The winner would live, and the loser would die. This announcement had agitated countless people in God's Domain when it came out. After all, the territories on the main continent were basically fixed at that point, and few disputes occurred between the various powers. The game had been trending toward stability. With the sudden appearance of several new worlds, how could the players of God's Domain not feel excited? The various major powers, in particular, had immediately begun sharpening their blades after the announcement. So long as the new expansion pack took place, they would immediately invade these new worlds and start a new journey. However, as a consequence of the expansion pack, Shifeng found himself fired. Upon seeing the stunned expressions of the people around her, Luo revealed a bitter smile and said, "My arrival here was a complete accident. While exploring an underground space in Dragonheart City by myself, I got caught in a space-time storm. By the time I woke up, I was already in this place. Currently, I have spent 20 days here already. Although I want to go back, I haven't been able to return even after dying or jumping into other space-time storms. What's most frustrating is that I can't log out of the game from here." "You can't log out?" At Luo's words, Solitary 9 and the others hurriedly checked whether they could log out or not. If they couldn't, then it would be a huge problem. Nowadays, all virtual gaming cabins had a nutrient solution storage that could let players stay online for 1 or 2 months without any problem. The latest model could even let players stay online for 3 months. And in the event that players depleted their supply of nutrient solution and couldn't leave their gaming cabin for some reason, the cabin would issue a system alert and professionals would come quickly to deal with the problem. Hence, players had no need to worry about starving to death. Even so, this wasn't good news. "No way. I really can't log out." Solitary 9 couldn't help growing anxious. It would be very inconvenient for them if they couldn't go offline. After all, there were many things they needed to do in the real world. Moreover, staying online long-term would affect their physical bodies to a certain degree. They can't log out? Looking at the logout button on his system interface, Shifeng found that it was still brightly lit, indicating that he could go offline whenever he wanted. Is it because of that world stone in my bag? After some thought, the only explanation Shifeng could come up with for this situation was the world stone. After all, this item could stabilize the principle of all things, which meant that he should be able to bypass the rules of this world. With this, it seems I don't need to be too anxious. While the ancient god's domain was indeed excellent, He also had many things he needed to do in the real world. He couldn't stay online long term. With the World Stone, he could now feel relieved. Shi Feng then conversed with Yu Luo about the basic information of this world, particularly about information relating to legacies. After the conversation, Lifeless Thorn and the others sighed ruefully. The ancient god's domain was indeed different. Compared to the modern god's domain, the players living in the ancient god's domain had a much easier time getting promoted. With a reliable team, players had no problem at all securing a complete Tier 3 legacy. In fact, with enough rare materials, one could even seek out a Tier 3 instructor to exchange for a complete legacy. The only limitation of this method was that players could only exchange up to 3 legacies. As for the promotion to Tier 4, while it was significantly more difficult than that to Tier 3, it was still much easier compared to the process in the modern god's domain. At the very least, players didn't have to seek out a legacy land in the middle of nowhere. They could simply head to a Tier 4 instructor and choose to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quest. They would then be teleported to a Tier 4 legacy space. However, the cost of this method was high. Each challenge required the payment of 15,000 magic crystals. The difficulty of the promotion quest was the same as in modern times. Players still had to learn a Tier 4 legacy skill or spell during the allotted time. Failure meant having to wait 20 natural days before they could re-challenge it. At this time, only 3 players in Meteorite City had successfully reached Tier 4. At this point, Shi Feng wished he could bring all of Zero Wing's Tier 4 Flowing Water Realm experts and above to this place. Even if it meant spending a lot of magic crystals, it would still be much better than searching for a legacy land. After all, searching for a legacy land was not only time-consuming, but success was also highly dependent on luck. If word of this matter got out in the modern god's domain, every power across the continent would most likely do everything they could to secure this opportunity. "Commander, can I borrow 10,000 magic crystals from you?" Lifeless Thorn asked as he looked at Shi Feng. "I'll pay you back double as soon as we return." "Commander, you can't play favorites." Solitary 9 objected hurriedly, knowing that Shi Feng did not bring a lot of magic crystals with him to the ancient god's domain. Every bit given away counted. Meanwhile, Yenya and Cleansing Whistle also stared at Shi Feng with eloquent eyes. "Relax." Shi Feng smiled spontaneously when he saw everyone's reactions. "Although I didn't bring a lot of magic crystals with me, I still have a way to let each of you challenge your promotion quests once. You can challenge yours as well, Yu Luo." "Me?" Yu Luo was stunned by Shi Feng's words. "But I don't have that many magic crystals." She, too, yearned to challenge her Tier 4 promotion quest. However, it wasn't easy to save up magic crystals while living in Meteorite City, as everything cost magic crystals here. Even until now, she had only around 4,000 magic crystals, still far off from the 15,000 required. "So long as you help me with a matter, I'll pay you 15,000 magic crystals as remuneration. How about it?" Shi Feng asked as he looked at Yu Luo. The ancient god's domain was a massive treasure trove, its value easily billions of times greater than a Grade 1 or Vane. It was no wonder 3 of the 5 great super guilds had deemed it worthwhile to work together to seal off the Earthfall's secret land. If such a secret became public, the consequences would be unimaginable. Of course, acquiring the various resources of the ancient god's domain wouldn't be an easy task either, since the base currency used here was the magic crystal, something relatively rare in the modern god's domain. And while the ancient god's domain had an abundance of magic crystals, it would be nigh impossible for modern players to earn a large amount of magic crystals here. After all, the modern god's domain was inferior to the ancient god's domain in almost every aspect. For players living in the modern god's domain, visiting the ancient god's domain would be equivalent to Stone Age people visiting the modern era. Modern players would need to work hard to earn magic crystals here. Fortunately, it wasn't completely impossible for modern players to earn money in the ancient era. One way to do so would be to take advantage of the unskillful handling of problems relating to the mind and soul in the ancient god's domain, particularly when it came to healing one's mental state. The ancient god's domain was actually far weaker than the modern god's domain in this aspect. This point was obvious from the gap between the concentration recovery potions sold on the market and those made by Cooling Cloud, an advanced master alchemist. In short, there were very few methods available for players to recover their concentration. Moreover, the death penalty here even placed players in a mentally weakened state for long periods, which prevented them from exhibiting their full strength. This meant that methods that could help heal the soul and mind were incredibly valuable. Okay. Yu Luo agreed immediately, understanding that Shi Feng was trying to help her. What do you need me to do? Taking out a crystal of souls from his bag, Shi Feng said, "Take this crystal of souls and consign it to the auction house for now. You're a member of the local Night Legion, so you should be able to spread information about it quickly. Just say that this is the crystal of souls that healed Angelica Teresa and that it has a minor soul-strengthening effect, which can increase one's chances of passing the Tier 4 promotion quest. Can you do that?" "No problem. If it is only publicizing the crystal, I can probably inform the whole city in just a few hours," Yu Luo said, nodding as she accepted the crystal of souls. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She had personally witnessed the crystal of souls' effects, so she knew that Shi Feng was indeed telling the truth. As for the aid the crystal could provide in the Tier 4 promotion quest, it was partly true. After all, if one's soul got strengthened, one's learning ability would improve as well. Hence, it couldn't be considered an outright lie. Meanwhile, spreading this news throughout the city was a piece of cake for her as a member of the local Night Legion. Yu Luo left the hotel room to get the word out, while Lifeless Thorn and the others went to their respective rooms to sort out their thoughts and prepare themselves to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests. Once Shi Feng was alone in his room, he took out a memory crystal from his bag. This crystal was none other than the complete legacy guidance crystal he had obtained from killing Tadelia. The effects of this room sure are excellent. My perception is strengthened by a further 30% compared to the outside world. Now that I have some time to myself, I can give it a try. Immediately afterward, Shi Feng took out 100 magic crystals and activated the legacy guidance crystal. Chapter 2772, Breakthrough inside the quiet and spacious living room. As Shi Feng continuously poured mana into the legacy guidance crystal in his hand, divine runes and magic arrays began appearing all over the crystal one after another. A short moment later, the mana inside the room started surging toward the memory crystal. Afterward, the crystal radiated a dark blue glow that enveloped Shi Feng. What a powerful legacy! Shi Feng was astonished when the blue light engulfed him. This was because the owner of this legacy wasn't an ordinary person but someone known as the Saint of the Ice World. The quality of this legacy was far superior to that of ordinary legacies. In addition, the Ice World Saint's legacy explained a lot about the ice element's operating principles and described some basic methods to construct one's mana body using the ice element as the basis. This sort of legacy guidance was incredibly rare in God's domain. In most cases, legacy guidances only provided a demonstration of the manipulation of magic elements and some explanations of their operating principles. The chances of a legacy guidance containing a demonstration of how to construct a mana body from scratch were less than 0.1%, let alone a saint's guidance and demonstration. Existences holding the title of saint were either gods or existences approaching gods. Some saints were even existences that gods feared greatly because a saint represented the epitome of a certain aspect in God's domain. Not even gods could match a saint in their specialty. In other words, while a saint could be a god wouldn't necessarily be a saint. The requirement to become a Tier 6 god wasn't to achieve the extreme of a certain aspect. Instead, one only needed to reach a certain threshold. As to what that threshold was, only those who had actually reached Tier 6 would know. Meanwhile, the Ice World Saint had undoubtedly attained the ultimate in the manipulation of the ice element. Hence, the Ice World Saint's control over the ice element was undoubtedly superior to everyone else's. Even gods wouldn't be a match for the Ice World Saint. Following this, time passed by, second after second. As Shi Feng injected more mana into the memory crystal, the Ice World Saint's demonstration sped up. The information the saint conveyed also became increasingly complicated. Half an hour later, the saint's demonstration ended. Shi Feng, who had been focused on the demonstration the entire time, felt mesmerized by the information he learned. What a pity! The guidance barely talked about elements other than the ice element. If the guidance for the other elements were as detailed as the one for the ice element, my control over the magic elements would definitely reach the Grandmaster standard. At that time, I might even stand a chance against superior mythic monsters. Shi Feng sighed ruefully when the demonstration video disappeared. He had to admit that the existences granted the title of saint were indeed powerful. Saints who had reached the ultimate in control of a specific magic element were especially amazing. Their understanding and explanation of magic elements were incredibly enlightening. However, the Ice World Saint's explanation became increasingly complicated as it progressed, and Shi Feng found himself struggling to understand the lecture. It felt as if the saint's explanation had gone from talking about one dimension to 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions. He could still understand up to the 3rd dimension, but when the explanation progressed to the 4th dimension, his mind failed to comprehend the saint's thinking. Despite understanding the surface meaning of the saint's words, he couldn't understand how to apply them in practice. Hence, Shi Feng could only treat the magic element usage methods explained at the end as gibberish. Nevertheless, he had still made massive gains. At the very least, he had made qualitative improvements in manipulating and understanding the ice element. Now, all he needed to do was experiment with his newfound knowledge. This Ice World Saint's legacy is truly extraordinary. I will have to get Violet Cloud and the others to study it earnestly. It would simply go to waste if given to someone without an affinity with the ice element. Shi Feng now placed even greater importance on the legacy guidance crystal in his hand. He wouldn't have if it were any other legacy guidance, but this was a saint's guidance they were talking about. The Ice World Saint's guidance even provided such detailed information about the magic elements. Giving this legacy guidance to someone without an affinity with the magic elements would be a complete and utter waste. In fact, had he used this legacy guidance crystal in the modern god's domain instead of the ancient god's domain, he would have wasted a precious opportunity. If the information he absorbed from watching the legacy guidance here consisted of only 20% of the total information, then he probably would have failed to comprehend even 5% of the information had he watched it in the modern god's domain. After all, he didn't possess much affinity with the ice element, he was much more attuned to the fire element. Fortunately, the environment in the ancient god's domain was excellent, and it drastically improved his affinity with and perception of the ice element. Now, he could perceive the ice element much more clearly than he could the fire element when he was in the modern god's domain. After absorbing the Ice World Saint's legacy guidance, Shi Feng took out a drop of soul water and drank it, boosting his concentration recovery and energizing his brain. Immediately afterward, he began attempting to break through his mana body's 100% threshold by constructing a new and simpler control array to link and control the various magic arrays all over his mana body. Previously, I insisted on using only one mana manipulation method to control the magic arrays of my body. On the other hand, the Ice World Saint constructed his mana body with the ice element and used several mana manipulation methods to gather and manipulate the ice element. For now, I should follow his example and try using 2 manipulation methods to control my mana body's magic arrays. After thinking up to this point, Shi Feng began experimenting. Previously, he had been controlling the magic arrays on his mana body according to the mana body's construction because he believed this was the only way to manipulate the mana in his mana body. However, his thoughts changed after seeing the Ice World Saint using multiple mana manipulation methods to control the magic elements in his mana body. Master magicians like Shi Feng excelled in attacking from multiple fronts. Since he couldn't break through the 100% threshold by attacking from only a single front, he would try attacking from multiple fronts simultaneously, which would allow him to maximize the effects of every magic array. Subsequently, the intensity of the mana Shi Feng's body radiated fluctuated repeatedly. Sometimes, his mana didn't even reach the standard of ordinary Tier 3 players. Sometimes, it would far surpass the times he had fully exerted himself. He experimented for 3 consecutive hours and tested several dozen mana manipulation methods. From his experimentation, he concluded that using multiple methods simultaneously to manipulate his mana body was incredibly difficult. Even with his current concentration standard, he could just barely implement 3 at a time. However, the benefits of a 3-fold manipulation method were also evident. He had directly broken through the 100% threshold and reached the legendary 112% mark. Unfortunately, when implementing a 3-fold manipulation method, his mind would be so occupied that he couldn't execute a bronze combat technique, much less a mana technique. Hence, to maintain his combat power, Shifeng had no choice but to abandon a 3-fold manipulation method for a 2-fold manipulation method. 87%, 102%, 99%. The completion rate of Shifeng's mana body changed constantly. At the same time, the rate at which he expended his concentration also increased. This is the last option that suits me. I'll be satisfied so long as it goes beyond 103%. Of the various 2-fold manipulation methods Shifeng had tried, the best one produced a result of 103%. However, he wasn't particularly satisfied with it. After all, he had already experienced what having a mana body with 112% of its potential unlocked felt like, and it was a truly amazing experience. Meanwhile, after combining the manipulation method of Light Shadow, the mana technique he frequently used, with his original mana manipulation method and continuously refining the combination, he had produced what he deemed to be the best combination currently possible. If this one still didn't work, he would have no choice but to settle for the 103% manipulation method. Taking a deep breath, Shifeng opened his eyes abruptly and began manipulating the magic arrays inside his mana body. Immediately, the magic arrays began operating one after another, drawing upon the ambient mana in the room. The mana density around him increased steadily. 120%, 134%, 157%. As the density of the mana surrounding Shifeng increased, the sensitivity of his 5 senses also improved slightly. Although the improvement was minor, there was no doubt that they had improved. The next moment, the numerous magic arrays all over Shifeng's mana body began combining into a super large magic array. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Boom. Suddenly, a ripple of mana spread from Shifeng's body and surged toward the surrounding walls. The mana inside the living room then stilled. However, a moment later, every bit of mana inside the room converged around Shifeng, a faint layer of mist forming around him. If one did not possess an acute sensitivity to mana, they would most likely have difficulty noticing this layer of condensed mana flowing over Shifeng's body. System, congratulations! You have successfully surpassed the mana body's 100% threshold and achieved a 110% completion rate. Chapter 2773, Mana Beyond the Limit. Upon hearing the system's voice ringing by his ears, Shifeng revealed a rare expression of joy. A 110% completion rate. Sure enough, integrating the mana manipulation method of mana techniques is the way to go. The mana manipulation method of Light Shadow was much more refined than the methods he had thought up by himself, especially in the aspect of manipulating magic elements. His own manipulation methods utilized only the 4 major elements, while Light Shadow utilized both the 4 major elements and the 7 supreme elements. Due to this difference, he had managed to unlock his mana body's potential to 110% with just a 2-fold manipulation method. And although there was only a 7% difference between this 2-fold manipulation method and his previous best method, past the 100% threshold, every 1% increase provided significant improvements to the mana body. The difference between a 103% mana body and 110% mana body was like the difference between heaven and earth. Subsequently, Shifeng punched at the empty space before him. Boom! All of a sudden, the living room's stable space shattered, spatial cracks forming one after another. Only after extending to the living room's wall and coming into contact with the magic barrier did this phenomenon stop. What an amazing result! Shifeng was astonished as he looked at the fractured space before him. his mana body had truly undergone a qualitative transformation after reaching a 110% completion rate. Now, even his normal punches carried a hint of a mana technique's power. Moreover, he didn't even need to manipulate his mana actively to gain such an effect. Afterward, Sherfeng closed his eyes and felt his surroundings. Even with his eyes closed, he could still perceive the entire room within his mind. Not even a speck of dust escaped his perception. Not only has my physique improved by at least 30%, but even my 5 senses have risen to the next level. In my present state, my perception is just slightly inferior to a demon prince's. Sherfeng opened his eyes, an ecstatic look appearing on his face. Although he still wasn't Ferbero's equal in terms of physique and 5 senses, he was much closer to matching the demon prince than before. This was undoubtedly joyous news for him. Originally, he felt that a Tier 4 player needed a legendary weapon to contend with a Tier 4 demon prince. After all, the difference in physique between the two was massive. However, Sherfeng now felt that it might just be possible for players to gain the astonishing physique of a demon prince while still at Tier 4. After all, his current mana body was only at a 110% completion rate, yet he was already close to matching a demon prince's physique. If he could push his mana body to the rumored 120% completion rate, his physique then might match that of a demon prince. Sherfeng was relatively confident of pushing his mana body to a 120% completion rate. After all, he had already proven that utilizing multiple manipulation methods to control his mana body was the way to go. At the very least, he wouldn't be utterly clueless about how to develop his mana body, unlike before. All he needed to do was figure out how to improve on this aspect. Now that I've reached the limits of twofold manipulation, I'll need to raise my concentration standard so that I can execute threefold manipulation fluidly. This way, I'll have a high chance of achieving a 120% completion rate. At that time, whether it is that divine dragon's trial or that mysterious NPC, I won't be utterly helpless. At this point, confidence welled up within Sherfeng. However, for safety's sake, I should first gather the Solomon's sword fragments. If I have the complete Solomon's sword, I won't have to fear going up against even true Tier 5 existences. After thinking up to this point, Sherfeng felt that he needed to resolve his matters in the ancient era quickly and return to the modern era to secure the remaining 2 fragments of Solomon's sword. Previously, he still hadn't been particularly confident of securing the 2 remaining fragments. However, now that his epic mana body had reached a 110% completion rate, he could probably solo even superior mythic monsters of the same level. The reason for his confidence was the qualitative transformation his mana had undergone. Originally, the mana flowing inside his mana body was merely gaseous, albeit of incredibly high density. However, after his epic mana body had reached a 110% completion rate, the mana flowing within it had thoroughly condensed into a mist. Moreover, it had achieved this state without him needing to manipulate external mana. Since God's Domain's foundation was mana, the strength of a player's mana had a huge impact on their combat power, especially when using skills and spells. A skill powered with mist-like mana wouldn't just be 30% or 50% stronger than a skill powered with gaseous mana. Instead, the two would be on completely different levels. Why were superior mythic monsters so much more powerful than mythic monsters of the same level? It was because their physique and the quality of the mana inside their bodies were superior to ordinary mythic monsters. Currently, although Sherfeng's physique still wasn't a match for superior mythic monsters, the quality of his mana was already on par with theirs. That, combined with the weapons and equipment he possessed, made it entirely possible for him to offset the difference and fight against superior mythic monsters on an equal footing. As Sherfeng was immersing himself in the effects of his improved mana, Yuluo suddenly contacted him. Guild leader Black Flame, information on the Crystal of Souls has already spread across Meteorite City. Many player forces and even NPC forces have expressed interest in the crystal. All of them are requesting to purchase it at a high price, Yuluo said excitedly. The Skyflare adventurer team, one of the top 3 player forces in the city, contacted me, saying they are willing to purchase the crystal for 150,000 magic crystals. If it were in the modern god's domain, 150,000 magic crystals would be equivalent to 60,000 gold. That was already enough money to arm a 100-man team to the teeth. In Meteorite City, 150,000 magic crystals could still fully gear a player in level 150 epic equipment. That won't be necessary. Since we said we would auction it, we will do just that. If they wish to buy it, they can buy it through the auction, Shifeng said, shaking his head. The offer of 150,000 magic crystals was indeed incredibly high. If the Crystal of Souls were to be auctioned in the modern god's domain, it definitely wouldn't sell for such a high price. In fact, it would be a miracle if he could sell it for 50,000 magic crystals. However, it was a different story in the ancient god's domain, where methods to recover from a mentally weakened state were incomparably rare. In fact, the streets of Meteorite City were littered with players in mentally weakened states. All of these players could only rely on the city's dense mana to slowly recover. After players fell into a mentally weakened state, a full recovery would take a very long time, even with the help of dense mana. If these players were willing to stay cooped up in Meteorite City without leaving to grind even once, they would still need around 2 weeks to recover. Yet, it was simply impossible for expert players to stay inactive for such a long period. A period of 2 weeks was already enough to create a huge gap between expert players. In fact, even dying twice wouldn't cost as much as remaining inactive for 2 weeks. Hence, an excellent recovery item like the Crystal of Souls was considerably precious to the ancient god's domain's players and NPCs. Meanwhile, his purpose in holding the auction this time was simply to find out the market price for the Crystal of Souls. Only after doing so could he maximize his profits. After all, he didn't have a lot of Crystals of Souls on hand since he didn't kill a lot of monsters that were 5 levels higher than himself and at the Great Lord rank or above. Not to mention, he would also use some of the crystals normally. As a result, he only had 43 Crystals of Souls saved up. On the other hand, he had plenty of soul water. At this time, he already had 2,764 drops accumulated. This was the fruit of long-term accumulation. Although he had given out a lot of soul water to the guild members using the bronze and silver legacy tablets, he still had a lot remaining. However, the soul water's effects were significantly inferior to those of the Crystal of Souls. If the Crystal of Souls couldn't sell for a high price, then the soul water naturally wouldn't sell for much either. But now that Skyflare is also competing for the Crystal of Soul, both player and NPC forces will most likely step aside out of respect for Skyflare. After all, aside from Skyflare's commander, one of Skyflare's vice commanders is rumored to have also reached Tier 4 already, Yu Luo explained. She naturally understood Shifeng's thoughts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, the various powers won't pick a fight with Skyflare just for one Crystal of Souls. If you go through with the auction, I'm afraid it won't go for a high price. This world was different from the world they came from. The NPC cities here were separated by great distances. Only after reaching Tier 4 would players be able to travel between NPC cities without worry. Tier 3 players could only roam the vicinity of the main city they belonged to. This meant that players residing in the same city would often come across each other. Meanwhile, Tier 4 combatants were considered true powerhouses in God's domain. Even NPCs feared them greatly, all the more the player forces. If one angered the Skyflare adventurer team, one shouldn't even think about leaving the city to grind for levels anymore. A player force is suspected to have 2 Tier 4 players? Shifeng was surprised by this revelation. He never thought that the player forces in the ancient god's domain would be so powerful to actually have 2 Tier 4 players, one more than what Zero Wing had. Although the search for legacy lands played a huge factor in this disparity, it wasn't so easy for players to complete their Tier 4 promotion quest, either. Immediately he said, "How about this? I'll rent a hall at the auction house, and we'll organize a small auction of our own. Announce that we will be selling a total of 5 Crystals of Souls, in addition to 50 drops of soul water, which is a slightly inferior version of the crystals. If we do that Skyflare adventurer team will have difficulty monopolizing everything." Shifeng's words surprised Yu Luo. She never thought he would actually have other concentration recovery treasures besides the Crystal of Souls. He was practically a walking treasure trove. Moreover, if Shifeng were to sell so many crystals of souls and soul water, Skyflare would indeed have difficulty monopolizing everything. There was no way the various powers in the city would step aside in the face of such numbers. After all, aside from being useful for healing the mind, these treasures could also increase by a small margin one's odds of completing the Tier 4 promotion quest. Not to mention, Skyflare wasn't the only power in the city with Tier 4 combatants. Okay, I'll spread this information right away. Yu Luo nodded, then promptly disconnected the call. Shifeng notified Lifeless Thorn and the others of his plans before making his way toward Meteorite City's auction hall by himself. In the meantime, Yu Luo also spread the news regarding the crystals of souls and soul water, instantly causing a sensation throughout the city. Chapter 2774, Ancient Legacy Inheritor Meteorite City, Skyflare Hotel. The Skyflare Adventurer team was one of the top 3 powers of Meteorite City, and the Skyflare Hotel it owned was one of the city's landmarks. Not only did the hotel boast 19 floors, but it even occupied the largest plot of land in the city's business district, with roughly the footprint of a sports stadium. The Skyflare Hotel also had the best resting environment in Meteorite City. Due to its relatively reasonable prices, it had become the first choice of many players and NPCs for lodging. The hotel was so popular that it ranked within the top 10 most profitable businesses of Meteorite City. At this time, a level 131 female assassin clad in pitch-black epic equipment walked into the Skyflare Hotel's top-floor lounge. She then stopped before an imposing man sorting documents behind an office table. This imposing, middle-aged man was none other than the Skyflare Adventurer team's commander, Lionheart, nicknamed Raging Lion. "Commander, I've already looked into the person you mentioned. She's Yu Luo, a cleric from the Night Legion. She's the one responsible for spreading the information across the city. Not long ago, she made another announcement stating that her side will be hosting a small auction at the auction house. They will be selling 5 crystals of souls and 50 drops of soul water, which is an inferior version of the Crystal of Souls," the black-clad assassin reported. She then passed a memory crystal to Lionheart and continued, "There is a record of her image in there. From what I found out, she seems to be a proxy. The real seller should be the party of 5 people that entered Meteorite City with the Night Legion. I included a record of their appearances in the crystal. Of the 5, the cloaked man walking in the lead is verified to be a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. However, I did not find any records of him appearing within Meteorite City's vicinity." "Good job," said the crimson light armor-clad Lionheart, who had reached level 133. After glancing at the images recorded in the memory crystal, he nodded and looked toward the several vice commanders inside the lounge. He then asked calmly, "What do you guys think of this matter? They're simply picking a fight with Skyflare. We've already shown a lot of respect to that Sword Emperor by offering such a high price, yet they still refuse to reciprocate," sneered a gloomy man standing beside the French window. "I think we need to teach these outsiders a lesson. If they wish to mingle in Meteorite City, they need to know their limits. The treasure in question can increase the success rate of completing the Tier 4 promotion quest. We absolutely cannot let the other powers in the city get their hands on it." The 3 other vice commanders present nodded in agreement with the gloomy man, Wind Chaser. Although Wind Chaser was a cold and ruthless person, he was incredibly loyal to the Skyflare Adventurer team. Most importantly, Wind Chaser was a Tier 4 Nightwalker. When it came to assassination, he was undoubtedly the best player in Meteorite City. In terms of top combatants, the Skyflare Adventurer team was already the strongest player force in Meteorite City. Simply put, this was the best opportunity for the Skyflare Adventurer team to consolidate its grip on Meteorite City. Hence, how could they let other player forces gain an opportunity to rise up? Now that the several outsiders were showing no respect to their adventurer team, they definitely needed to teach these outsiders a lesson. It didn't matter even if the other party had a Tier 4 Sword Emperor on its side. After all, not only did Wind Chaser hold a peak hidden class, but he had even inherited a special mana technique. So long as he was hidden in the darkness, he could potentially one-shot even Tier 4 MTs, let alone a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Well, let's go over and talk to him first. If we can agree on a good price, everybody can be happy. If not, it won't be too late to take action, Lionheart said after giving the matter some thought. Lionheart, too, agreed with Wind Chaser's opinion, especially about the Crystal of Souls, which could strengthen a player's soul by a small margin. After all, the strength of a player's soul would greatly affect their learning ability. Even a small boost to the soul would be a great help to players learning a Tier 4 skill or spell during their promotion quest. Hence, Skyflare had to obtain the Crystal of Souls. The 4 vice commanders present all nodded in agreement with Lionheart's decision. Billow, find out that Sword Emperor's current location. I need to know right away, Lionheart ordered the black-clad assassin. Commander, don't you know how I operate? Smiling, the petite assassin named Crimson Billow added, as soon as you told me to look into this matter, I set my sights on that Sword Emperor. Hence, I had people keep track of his every move. Currently, that Sword Emperor is at the auction house. By the looks of it, he plans to rent an auction hall to host a small auction. Good. Lionheart nodded in satisfaction as he looked at Crimson Billow. Billow, you and Chaser will follow me in secret. I'll meet with that Sword Emperor in person and find out his origins and purpose. Truthfully, he felt very curious about the Sword Emperor mentioned. Tier 4 players were still incredibly rare in the current God's domain. According to Skyflare's information network, most main cities had only one Tier 4 player. The main cities with 2 or 3 Tier 4 players were all cities with massive populations. Logically, after a player reached Tier 4, the first thing they should do was expand their influence in their city as much as possible, capitalizing on their advantage. However, this foreign Sword Emperor had actually chosen to visit another city. It was simply inconceivable. Understood. Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser responded respectfully. Meteorite City, Auction House. Meteorite City was a large trade city, and the auction house could be said to be the most prosperous place here. Not only was the local auction house much larger than the ones found in the modern God's domain's royal capitals, but its visitor traffic was also massive. A huge variety of products was on sale, including mana ore, which was quite rare in the modern God's domain, sold by the stack at dastardly cheap prices. One stack of 200 mana ores cost only 49 magic crystals. If sold in the modern God's domain, it would be bought out instantly. After all, mana ore was a byproduct of certain ores, and the chances of acquiring it were low. Hence, the price of mana ore in the modern world was already close to 30 silver coins per piece. Even then, supply was still tight. It's a pity I can't travel freely between the two worlds. Otherwise, I could definitely make a killing, and Zero Wing wouldn't have to worry about lacking funds and resources anymore, Shifeng sighed ruefully as he looked at the available items in the auction house. According to the old man's words, only 10 people could visit the ancient God's domain at a time. Moreover, while first-time visitors could get in for free, the second visit onward had a price. It might be fine if the price was reasonable, but if it was exorbitant, his visits to the ancient era would be limited. Although he could leave the visits to other people, the importance of the ancient God's domain was too significant. If the Earthfall secret land's secret got out, every superpower on the continent would either try to annihilate Zero Wing or compete for the secret land. Shifeng spent 500 magic crystals to rent a small auction hall that could fit 200 people at most. For Meteorite City's various powers, this number was already more than enough. After Shifeng finished making the necessary arrangements, an imposing and mighty man suddenly approached him. The man was clad in crimson light armor and carried a knight's shield with crimson runes. At the appearance of this imposing man, silence descended momentarily on the entire auction house. Everyone looked at this man in surprise, a hint of awe and admiration gleaming in the eyes of both players and NPCs. Crap! It's Lionheart! He looks so handsome. He looks much better than the photo on Skyflare's promotional posters. But why is a big shot like him here? Could it be because of the news of that small auction? A discussion over Lionheart promptly broke out in the auction hall. Everyone couldn't help wondering why a VIP like Lionheart would personally visit the auction house. Skyflare's commander. He actually came in person? Yuluo, who had just arrived in the auction house, gaped in shock and doubted her eyes when she saw Lionheart enter the building. Lionheart was an amazing individual. Despite having started with nothing in this ruthless world, the adventurer team he established had grown to the point where it managed to defeat several large guilds and become one of the top 3 powers in Meteorite City. In terms of achievements, the Skyflare adventurer team easily eclipsed the Heaven's Blade adventurer team. On the interstellar continent, living resources were incredibly scarce. Ordinary civilians couldn't hope to compare with large guilds in terms of the resources they could acquire. This was because large guilds generally had high-level authorities as backers. These authorities boasted resources and influence far greater than those of the large guilds on Earth. Just one word from these high-level authorities would be enough to allow a civilian who could barely feed themselves to move to the interstellar continent's core area. In the core area, one would be able to not only eat like a king but also enjoy recreational activities in the real world and appreciate the beauty of the vast universe. Just this point alone allowed large guilds to walk over civilian players with no background. Meanwhile, Lionheart was only a civilian on the interstellar continent. His development of Skyflare to such an extent was a remarkable feat. He was practically a legend among the civilians there. If he were in the modern god's domain, he would definitely become a noteworthy existence known throughout the mainland. The next moment, Lionheart stopped before Shurfeng. Immediately, everyone in the auction house focused on Shurfeng curiously, the stares making him feel very uncomfortable. "You're the person selling the crystals of souls, right?" Looking at Shurfeng, Lionheart went straight to the point, saying, "I am Lionheart, the Skyflare adventurer team's commander. You should have heard of me already." "Of course, I've heard of you. In fact, I've heard a lot about you." Shurfeng did not deny Lionheart's statement. Calmly, he asked, "May I know what business you have with me?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shurfeng had gained plenty of information regarding Lionheart. The man was undoubtedly a powerhouse. Not only did he reach the domain realm, but he had even set foot onto the second step, the upper domain realm. The amount of time he had spent immersed in virtual reality games was much greater than that of the modern God's Domain's players. Rumor had it that Lionheart's control over mana had already reached the advanced Master Magician standard and that he was only half a step away from becoming a Grandmaster. In addition, Lionheart also possessed an ancient hidden class called the Blood Knight, which gave him the strongest defense among players. At this point, he was a complete monster when it came to defense. His terrifying defense was why the Skyflare adventurer team had managed to conquer plenty of powerful bosses. The adventurer team had even killed quite a few level 120 superior mythic bosses. Hence, Lionheart was also known as Meteorite's Wall by Meteorite City's players. "This isn't a place to talk. Why don't we find a place to sit down and have a proper conversation?" Lionheart suggested as he scrutinized Shurfeng. When he saw Shurfeng's special state, he was surprised and confused. However, he quickly set aside his surprise and treated Shurfeng with the respect due a foreign Tier 4 expert. "Sure." Shurfeng nodded. He then turned to the empty space a short distance behind Lionheart and asked, "Are those two coming along too?" Chapter 2775, Astronomical Transaction. Those two? Yuluo was confused when she followed Shurfeng's gaze. After all, there was nobody there. Even when she pushed her perception as a Void Realm expert to the limit, she still couldn't sense any aura or presence of a living being. She didn't notice any unusual fluctuations in space, either. Experts at the Void Realm would be aware of even the slightest disturbances around them. At the end of the day, an assassin's stealth only turned them invisible to the naked eye. They remained physically present in the world. So long as they moved, no matter how slow, they would cause some air turbulence. Such unnatural changes wouldn't escape the perception of a Void Realm expert. Hence, Even a Void Realm assassin generally couldn't get within 30 yards of other Void Realm experts undetected. Normally, they could operate only outside the 30-yard radius. As for assassins at the Domain Realm, while they could perform better, they still wouldn't be able to get within 20 yards of Void Realm experts undetected. And even if they did manage this feat, they would be able to maintain it for only a matter of seconds. However, the spot Shifeng was currently looking at was within 20 yards of himself. Moreover, the conversation between Shifeng and Lionheart had lasted more than a few seconds already. Even a Domain Realm expert wouldn't be able to stay hidden for so long. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Lionheart was slightly surprised. Simultaneously, a hint of alertness and admiration appeared in his eyes. Amazing! As expected of a Tier 4 expert capable of moving between main cities. Part of the reason Lionheart had brought Windchaser and Crimson Billow with him this time was to test Shifeng's strength. Crimson Billow was ranked second in Skyflare in terms of stealth. Utilizing her advantages as a Domain Realm expert, she had created a unique concealment technique that allowed her to maintain a high degree of stealth despite being in motion. Meanwhile, after combining this technique with a potion that hid one's life aura, let alone Tier 3 Domain Realm experts, even Tier 4 Domain Realm experts wouldn't detect her even when she was within 20 yards of them. Of course, Tier 4 Domain Realm experts would definitely detect her once she got within 16 yards of them. Even so, being able to conceal herself to such an extent was already more than enough for her to rank at the top of Meteorite City and instill fear into Tier 4 experts. Windchaser was even more powerful. After reaching Tier 4, his stealth skill was no longer limited to just turning his physical body invisible and concealing his life aura. Instead, the skill would place his body in a shadow space. No matter what he did inside this space, it wouldn't affect the outside world. Naturally, others wouldn't be able to detect his movements while he was inside this shadow space. In fact, despite knowing about Windchaser's ability, Lionheart hadn't realized that Windchaser was already standing within 20 yards of him. Nevertheless, Shifeng had stated that there were two people behind Lionheart. This meant that he had detected both Crimson Billow and Windchaser. "Chaser, Billow, you two can show yourselves now," Lionheart said, smiling as he looked at the empty space Shifeng indicated. "No need to hide anymore." As soon as Lionheart finished speaking, two figures gradually appeared in that empty space. They were none other than Windchaser and Crimson Billow. The two assassins were looking at Shifeng with eyes brimming with surprise and confusion. "Commander, did I show some irregularities just now?" Crimson Billow quietly asked Lionheart through the team chat. Afraid that she would get detected, she had deliberately maintained a 21-yard distance between herself and Shifeng. After all, she hardly knew anything about Shifeng, apart from the fact that he was a Tier 4 expert, and she didn't wish to ruin Lionheart's attempt at probing Shifeng's strength. Yet, despite the 21-yard distance, he still detected her. Excluding Lionheart, this was the first time a Tier 4 individual perceived her from beyond 20 yards. "You didn't. It's just that this person is much stronger than we thought," Lionheart responded, shaking his head. "Don't act rashly against him afterward." Shifeng had discovered not only Crimson Billow but also Windchaser. While defeating a Tier 4 expert like Shifeng would be simple for the current Skyflare, killing him would be incredibly difficult. Unless absolutely necessary, they had best not offend this Sword Emperor. In response, both Crimson Billow and Windchaser nodded silently. The trio had conversed for only 2 or 3 seconds, so outsiders did not find anything wrong with the situation. They merely saw Windchaser and Crimson Billow approaching Lionheart slowly after making their appearance. When Yuluo, who stood beside Shifeng, saw the two assassins walking over, her eyes widened in shock. There really are two people. Despite the two assassins being so close to her, she actually failed to notice either of them. This overturned her understanding of the assassin class. Meanwhile, when Shifeng saw the two assassins, a hint of wariness also appeared in his eyes. The two assassins were astonishingly strong. This was especially true for Windchaser. If not for the recent breakthrough Shifeng achieved with his mana body, which granted him a physique and perception far superior to ordinary Tier 4 individuals, he would have most likely failed to notice Wind Chaser's presence. If Wind Chaser really were intent on targeting a specific player, it would be a nightmare for the said player. After all, the Tier 4 assassin was capable of suddenly appearing within 20 yards of his target without giving off any indications, a distance that any Tier 4 combatant could cross in the blink of an eye. If Shi Feng was not careful, even he might end up falling prey to Wind Chaser's ambush. Let's head to a reception room to continue our conversation, Lionheart suggested to Shi Feng. Sure. Shi Feng did not object to the proposal. His original goal in coming to the ancient god's domain was to acquire a large amount of resources. Meanwhile, the best way to do so was by partnering with a local tyrant. He could gather resources much faster this way than if he did it by himself. In fact, he could even gain access to items that normally wouldn't appear on the market. Lionheart's taking the initiative to seek him out was naturally good news for Shi Feng. Lionheart led Shi Feng and Yu Luo to the top-floor reception room he had reserved beforehand. Commander Lionheart. After taking his seat, Shi Feng went straight to the point, saying, "Please just say what you have to say. There is no need for us to waste both our time by playing around with words." "You really are a straightforward person, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart smiled at Shi Feng's words. "I was thinking the same thing. In that case, I'll be blunt with you. Skyflare wishes to purchase all of the crystals of souls and soul water you are selling. It seems you are very ambitious, Commander Lionheart. You actually plan to monopolize Meteorite City?" Shi Feng didn't feel particularly surprised at Lionheart's declaration. Calmly, he said, "Of course, we can go with such an arrangement as well. Only, I have quite a number of these items, and I'm afraid your adventurer team can't swallow them all." As soon as Shi Feng finished speaking, Wind Chaser, who stood behind Lionheart, laughed. "What a joke! There is nothing in Meteorite City that our adventurer team cannot swallow." Looking at Shi Feng, Wind Chaser sneered, "Of course, that is under the premise that your price is fair." At Wind Chaser's provocation, Shi Feng simply shook his head and smiled. Truthfully, even at 150,000 magic crystals per crystal of souls, you won't be able to afford everything. Not to mention, there is still the soul water. He had a total of 43 crystals of souls. If he sold each for 150,000 magic crystals, that would equate to 6.45 million magic crystals. Even though the ancient god's domain was rich in resources, a player force with a sphere of activity limited to just one city couldn't take out such an amount. At Shi Feng's words, Wind Chaser, who initially planned to probe Shi Feng further, fell silent. There was no way a Tier 4 expert like Shi Feng wouldn't know about the Skyflare adventurer team's status and general wealth in Meteorite City. For Shi Feng to say such words meant he had absolute confidence backing him. Meanwhile, after hearing Shi Feng's response, both Yu Luo and Crimson Billow couldn't help gasping. They never thought that Shi Feng would actually be so wealthy. They had already investigated the Crystal of Souls, so they knew it was a precious treasure that wasn't obtained easily. Yet, Shi Feng had just declared that Skyflare couldn't afford to purchase all his stock. This proved that Shi Feng had a lot of crystals of souls on hand. Who knew how many Tier 4 experts one could create with so many crystals of souls? "You truly are extraordinary, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart immediately broke into a smile. Moreover, this was a very sincere smile. "I apologize to you on behalf of my brother. At the same time, I also hope that the Skyflare adventurer team can form a long-term partnership with you. What do you think? I admit that Skyflare cannot take out the necessary magic crystals to purchase all your crystals of souls. However, our adventurer team still ranks within the top 3 of Meteorite City's player forces in daily income. We might not be able to swallow everything in one bite, but I'm sure we can do so after several or a dozen bites. Furthermore, I can assure you that not only will we purchase each crystal of souls for 200,000 magic crystals, but we will also ensure a weekly transaction of 3 million magic crystals at a minimum. May I know what you think of this, Brother Black Flame?" Yu Luo gaped in shock at Lionheart's words despite herself. She never imagined that the Skyflare adventurer team had such astonishing wealth. Even the superpowers in the modern god's domain were far from comparable to Skyflare in magic crystal acquisition. Moreover, Lionheart even raised the price of the Crystal of Souls to 200,000 magic crystals. Skyflare was probably the only power in Meteorite City capable of offering such a price. After all, a piece of fragmented legendary equipment cost only around 500,000 magic crystals, while fragmented legendary weapons cost around 1 million magic crystals. Lionheart's promise of a weekly transaction of 3 million magic crystals meant Skyflare was trading away 3 fragmented legendary weapons every week. Commander! At this time, even Wind Chaser was stunned by Lionheart's offer. The Skyflare adventurer team operated only in Meteorite City's vicinity, and there were only so many resources available in the area. If Skyflare really pushed through with this transaction, the adventurer team would have to tighten its belt and strictly limit its future expenditures. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Okay, I can agree to those conditions, Shifeng said, nodding. After giving the matter some thought, he felt that this price was probably the best he could get for the Crystals of Souls. Even if he could get a higher price at an auction, it wouldn't be much higher. However, before this, I wish to test you, Commander Lionheart. We can verify our transaction depending on your performance. What do you think? Test our commander? Shifeng's words infuriated Wind Chaser. Crimson Billow's complexion also darkened, a hint of hostility appearing in her eyes as she looked at Shifeng. Even super guilds would not dare say that they wished to test their commander's qualifications for cooperation, yet a person of unknown origin actually did so. Shifeng was utterly looking down on the Skyflare adventurer team. However, before Wind Chaser or Crimson Billow could say anything else, Lionheart extended a hand to stop them. He then looked at Shifeng with a glint of determination in his eyes as he asked, "May I know how you wish to conduct your test, Brother Black Flame?" "Simple. So long as you survive a hit from me, you'll pass," Shifeng said decisively. Chapter 2776, Duel Between Sword and Shield, Survive a Hit from You? Lionheart was momentarily stunned by Shifeng's words. Even Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow fell into a daze for a long time. They felt that Shifeng was simply toying with the Skyflare adventurer team. Looking at Shifeng, Wind Chaser asked to verify, "Are you sure this is your condition? Do you know what title our commander holds in Meteorite City?" Initially, Wind Chaser thought that Shifeng would make things difficult for them to invalidate this transaction. Yet, Shifeng's condition for partnership was simply for Lionheart to survive a hit from him. This test was beyond simple. Let alone Tier 4 players, even superior mythic monsters were incapable of one-shotting Lionheart. The Skyflare adventurer team had relied precisely on Lionheart's overwhelming defense to develop to its current extent. It would be a complete and utter joke to say that a Tier 4 player could one-shot Lionheart. For a moment, Wind Chaser even suspected that Shifeng had never bothered looking into Lionheart's information. Either that or the man thought that Lionheart's fame was exaggerated. Of course, I'm very certain. Shifeng nodded earnestly. Yuluo also couldn't help looking at Shifeng strangely. She simply couldn't understand why Shifeng would set such a meaningless condition. She knew that Shifeng was indeed very strong. This was evident from how he repelled over a dozen Tier 3 demon leaders with one move. However, Lionheart wasn't a pushover either. The achievements he had today were piled up through innumerable battles. Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow turned to Lionheart. Although they didn't know what Lionheart thought of this matter, Shifeng's test presented no problem to them. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to call it a free pass. Meanwhile, so long as their two sides entered into a partnership, the Skyflare adventurer team would be able to gain full control over Meteorite City easily. In fact, it wouldn't be long before they could start establishing branches in other NPC main cities. And even if the player forces of the other cities opposed Skyflare's intrusion, they would have difficulty doing so. After all, what truly mattered in a fight between powers were Tier 4 combatants. Although the saying one Tier 4 player could easily go up against a countless number of Tier 3 players was indeed exaggerated, it was still a fact that Tier 4 players could do many things that Tier 3 players couldn't. This was the difference between tiers and life ratings. No problem. I agree to your condition, Lionheart said. After giving the matter some thought, he couldn't find any problems with Shurfeng's condition. However, are we going to hold the test here? In Lionheart's opinion, Shurfeng probably wasn't aware of the strength of his Blood Knight class. As one of the incredibly rare ancient legacies in God's domain, the skills it offered were far superior to ordinary peak legacies. Not to mention, he currently had 3 fragmented legendary items on him: the Bulwark of Holy Blood, the Void Magic Armor, and the Windwall Ring. Even when he had only the fragmented legendary shield and armor, he could already fend off superior mythic monsters. In fact, if not for the high HP and defense of superior mythic monsters, he could even solo these monsters, given enough time. Now that he had the Windwall Ring, his defensive capabilities had soared even further. I'm afraid this place isn't sufficient. We'll need to rent an advanced combat room, Shurfeng said, shaking his head. In that case, let's go to our adventurer team's Skyflare hotel. There's a special combat room there. It should be enough for us to display our strengths, Lionheart suggested. A special combat room? Shurfeng was surprised at Lionheart's words. He never thought that special combat rooms already existed in the ancient god's domain. Special combat rooms were far superior to advanced combat rooms. They were perfect for practicing skill and spell usage. However, special combat rooms simply weren't something that could be acquired at this stage of the game. Let's go to the Skyflare Hotel then. Shurfeng and Yuluo followed Lionheart's group to the Skyflare Hotel, which was only 1 block away from the auction house. The instant the group walked into the Skyflare Hotel, Yuluo grew a little excited. The Skyflare Hotel wasn't a place just anyone could enter and rest at. Aside from Skyflare's members and the members of Partnered Powers, who received a 50% discount, visitors would be charged the full price when staying at the hotel. Meanwhile, even the most basic room here cost 400 magic crystals per day. Even a Tier 3 Void Realm expert like herself wouldn't dare stay here for no good reason. Only when she needed to verify some theories and techniques, she thought of would she make an exception and stay here. As for Shurfeng, he felt as if he had just walked into a sacred training ground. The density of the mana here was truly amazing, much more than even in Stone Forest City's Freedom Hotel. In fact, the boost he got for his perception of magic elements was roughly 20% higher than what he got from the hotel he was currently staying at. No wonder he's so confident of being able to take out 3 million magic crystals per week. At this time, Shurfeng finally understood why Lionheart was so confident in the Skyflare adventurer team's abilities. Meanwhile, along with Shurfeng and Yuluo's arrival, an uproar occurred among Skyflare's executives. I heard that guy named Black Flame wants to test the commander. What? That guy must be crazy. He thinks the commander is someone he can test? Even if the commander just stands there and does nothing, he won't be able to injure the commander in the slightest. It's not a standard PvP though. He only wants the commander to take a hit from him. It seems this person is trying to show his strength to our adventurer team. He must be worried that he can't beat the commander, so he came up with that kind of condition. At that time, even if he fails to injure the commander, he could still salvage his reputation somewhat. When Skyflare's several dozen executives looked at Shurfeng, who had already entered the special combat room, they promptly conducted hushed discussions among themselves. They all felt that Shurfeng was pulling such a stunt because he wished to gain respect yet was also worried about making a fool of himself. However, in their opinion, Shurfeng's actions were pointless. After all, when Lionheart dueled against other players, he almost never used his full strength to achieve victory. Even Wind Chaser, who had reached Tier 4 as well, had been almost helpless against Meteorite's wall. And although Wind Chaser had eventually emerged victorious in his duel against Lionheart, he had done so by dragging out the fight and chipping away at Lionheart's HP. Not to mention, this was in a situation where Lionheart had not gone all out. Otherwise, even Wind Chaser shouldn't think of harming Lionheart in the slightest. Shortly afterward, all of Skyflare's executives packed the special combat room's spectator stands. Some executives had even abandoned their quests to spectate this duel. Lionheart had never fought in a duel since Windchaser had gotten promoted to Tier 4. During this period, Lionheart had improved significantly. Not only did he gain a new Tier 4 legacy skill, but he had also obtained the fragmented legendary ranked Windwall ring, a defense-oriented ring. At this point, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that their commander's strength had already surpassed their imagination. While Skyflare's executives were eagerly waiting for the duel to begin, Shifeng and Lionheart were standing in the middle of the room's spacious battlefield. At this point, both fighters had already adjusted their conditions and were ready to take action at any time. "I'm ready. You can make your move whenever you want," Lionheart said as he raised his shield and longsword. From the crimson runes decorating the shield and longsword, it was evident the two were a set. Only, the mana gathered around the weapon was slightly inferior in quality compared to what was around the bulwark of the Holy Blood. At this time, Lionheart stopped concealing his statistics. Immediately, his HP of 16.6 million appeared for everyone to see, flaunting the high HP of a Tier 4 defensive class. It was evident that Lionheart planned to let Shifeng see his own strength. "He has 16.6 million HP? How is this possible?" Yuluo gasped reflexively when she saw Lionheart's HP. As a defensive class player, Lionheart already possessed incredibly high defense, to begin with. Combined with his various defensive skills and HP, he was practically a boss monster. Yuluo even doubted that Shifeng could one-shot Lionheart even if the latter did not defend himself. In fact, it would already be a miracle if Shifeng could remove 1/3 of Lionheart's HP in one hit. Amazing! Level 130 Tier 3 defensive classes usually have only 9 million HP on average, yet you have almost twice that, Shifeng said in admiration. "It's nothing. It's only because of my unique legacy." Lionheart didn't pay particular attention to Shifeng's words of appreciation. On the contrary, he wanted to use this opportunity to let Shifeng realize the Skyflare adventurer team's might. After all, Skyflare had already lost once to Shifeng before. He needed to reclaim this loss and level the playing field. "Since you're ready, I'll begin." Shifeng naturally understood what was going through Lionheart's mind. Unfortunately, Lionheart simply wasn't aware of Shifeng's aim. "Come." Lionheart readied his shield, a serious expression appearing on his face. Immediately afterward, not only did Lionheart's aura skyrocket in intensity, but a faint, blood-red barrier had also appeared around his body. "Crap. The commander is getting serious. He's actually going all out and fully exerting his mana body right off the bat." One of Skyflare's vice commanders, a robust, level 132 shield warrior, said in astonishment. "Blood armor." This was the Tier 4 legacy skill Lionheart obtained after achieving a 100% completion rate with his mana body. Although the magic barrier appeared flimsy, it could absorb up to 5 million damage. Moreover, the barrier would replenish itself once every 40 seconds. In other words, if one failed to cause over 5 million damage to Lionheart within 40 seconds, one had no chance of slaying him. Had Lionheart used this move during his duel with Windchaser back then, Windchaser wouldn't have been able to harm him at all. However, before Skyflare's members were done admiring their commander's Tier 4 passive skill, they saw Shifeng unsheath the abyssal blade. Immediately afterward, everyone clearly sensed the mana in the room trembling and freezing momentarily. Before anyone could react to the unexpected development, Shifeng raised the abyssal blade with both hands and looked at Lionheart. The mana inside the special combat room then began to boil, the phenomenon causing everyone present to shudder involuntarily. Afterward, everyone felt a wave of scorching heat wash over their body. How is this possible? When Windchaser sensed the mana around him boiling, he was stunned. After all, the space inside the special combat room was massive, with a 1,000-yard radius. That was more than enough for 2 Tier 4 players to fight to their heart's content. Nevertheless, Shifeng caused all of the mana inside the combat room to boil just by entering a stance. This kind of thing was simply unheard of. At this time, Lionheart's gaze also changed. If entering a stance was enough to trigger such a phenomenon, Shifeng's strength was definitely far more extraordinary than he initially thought. However, before Lionheart could take any further action, the flow of time inside the combat room seemed to slow down. The only thing capable of moving was apparently the sword in Shifeng's hands. Second sword, Holy Devour. As the long sword descended, an overwhelming pressure fell upon the room. Afterward, space within the room ignited, as if it couldn't withstand the terrifying and violent pressure. The resulting flames threatened to burn everything in the room into nothing. Not good. Holy Blood Wall. For Saint's Descent. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Upon seeing the boundless flames approaching him, Lionheart hurriedly activated the defensive skill Holy Blood Wall, then stabbed his shield into the ground and activated his strongest Tier 4 defensive legacy skill. The next moment, a twofold magic array appeared before the bulwark of Holy Blood, which was followed by an illusory crimson shield that was over a dozen meters tall. Crimson runes flared all over Lionheart's body, solidifying the surrounding space until it was as sturdy as a steel wall. Meanwhile, the instant Lionheart used For Saint's Descent, the endless sea of flames devoured him like a giant beast. Boom! Accompanied by a thunderous explosion, the space within the special combat room transformed into a dark, empty void. Chapter 2777, Shocking Skyflare. A dark void enveloped the battlefield. Let alone Tier 3 players, even Tier 4 players couldn't survive in this space. Meanwhile, when Skyflare's executives, seated in the spectator stands, saw this scene, they were dumbfounded. How can one / carry such destructive power? Even those Tier 4 NPCs aren't capable of exhibiting such power. Is he really just a Tier 4 player? He has such terrifying strength, yet we actually failed to find any information on him. Just who is he? After a moment of silence, Skyflare's executives began a heated discussion among themselves as they goggled at the battlefield's shattered space. At this time, they no longer underestimated Shifeng in the slightest. Now, only shock and fear filled their hearts. With such terrifying combat power, Shifeng was no longer an opponent vulnerable to Zerg tactics. Only powerful Tier 4 NPCs could match him. He was actually so strong. Tsu Luo's eyes were also wide with disbelief as she looked at the shattered space. Even Angelica Teresa's strongest attack would fall short of Shifeng's from what she could tell. Angelica Teresa was a peak-rank Tier 4 existence and one of the top 5 powerhouses of Meteorite City. In addition, as an NPC, the items and basic attributes she possessed were also far superior to players. Yet, Shifeng had actually executed an attack way stronger than even Angelica Teresa's strongest attack. Commander! The commander couldn't have fallen, right? After a while, Wind Chaser and the others snapped out of their daze and searched hurriedly for Lionheart's figure in the dark void. Out of the player attacks they had seen thus far, Shifeng's was undoubtedly the strongest. Even Tier 4 NPCs were unlikely to be capable of executing such an attack. Hence, although they knew that Lionheart possessed a heaven-defying defense, they couldn't help doubting his ability to survive Shifeng's attack. After everyone had searched for some time, the shattered space gradually recovered. 2 vague figures appeared, standing in the recovering space, with one of them looking incredibly miserable. This is great. The commander is still alive. I knew the commander could withstand it. He is Meteorite's wall, after all. There's no way he can be one-shot by a player. When Skyflare's members saw Lionheart's figure, they immediately grew excited. However, unlike his colleagues, Lionheart did not feel happy or excited at all. Instead, his heart pounded with fear and relief. That was too close. If not for the Windwall ring, I would have definitely been one-shot. Lionheart smiled bitterly when he looked at his remaining HP. Currently, he had less than 6 million HP remaining. While this might seem like a lot, he had only managed to retain this amount of HP thanks to the Windwall ring's passive skill. The Windwall ring's passive skill, Wind's Protection, was capable of reducing all the damage he received by 35%. Even if he received a Tier 5 attack, its damage would still be reduced by a full 35%. Wind's Protection was also the Windwall Ring's only skill. The Windwall Ring was different from other equipment with passive damage reduction skills. Although the alternatives might even have skills offering much greater reductions than Wind's Protection on paper, there were hidden limits to these skills. Generally, their upper limit was Tier 4. Once an attack reached the Tier 4 standard, their effect would be significantly weaker. And against Tier 5 attacks, their effect was practically negligible. However, that was not the case for the Windwall Ring's Wind's Protection. The skill's description clearly stated that it could reduce the damage of even Tier 5 attacks by 35% and not 1% less. On the other side, after Shi Feng executed Holy Devour, his complexion had paled significantly. Is it still too much to execute this move? When Shi Feng sensed that more than half of his concentration had disappeared, he was shocked. He had already developed his epic mana body to 110% completion rate, yet he still had trouble gathering and condensing the mana required to execute Holy Devour. For a moment, he couldn't help imagining what kind of power he could exhibit if he successfully executed the third sword, Holy Annihilation. Tier 5? Tier 6? Regardless, this is a good result. At the very least, I can now use the complete Holy Devour. Now, I should be able to cope even against a half-step Demon King. As Shi Feng sheathed the Abyssal Blade, he was satisfied with his previous attack. Although his mana had undergone a qualitative transformation, thanks to the improvement of his mana body, the improvement this change brought to his skills and spells was limited. It wasn't enough for them to undergo a qualitative transformation. However, it was a different story for mana techniques, whose power was highly dependent on the quality of the mana used. Now, if he went all out, he could execute an attack at the Tier 5 standard. The only drawback of Holy Devour was the huge burden it placed on his concentration. Even at peak condition, he could execute the complete Holy Devour only once. Nevertheless, it was already more than enough as a trump card. As Shi Feng was savoring the experience of executing Holy Devour, Lionheart approached him. "Brother Black Flame, that move of yours really is ruthless. If I hadn't gained some improvements recently, I would have really died," Lionheart said jocularly. At this moment, Lionheart no longer underestimated or looked at Shi Feng with contempt. Only respect was present in his eyes. The fact that Shi Feng had managed to execute such a move as a player meant that he already stood at the apex of the entire God's domain. Just this point alone was already more than enough to earn him everyone's respect. In God's domain, strength was everything. It was also something that could not be faked. For Shi Feng to have developed himself to this extent, he must have experienced countless trials and hardships. "You're too humble, Commander Lionheart. The fact that you managed to block my attack is all due to your own ability, not luck." Looking at Lionheart, Shi Feng added, "Now that our one-hit agreement is complete, according to our previous arrangement, I will supply the crystals of souls and soul water to only the Skyflare adventurer team for Meteorite City's side." "Thank you. As for the matter of magic crystals, please rest assured. The Skyflare adventurer team definitely won't let you down, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart couldn't help feeling a little happy at Shi Feng's words. With Shi Feng willing to partner with Skyflare, Skyflare would be able to take full control of Meteorite City easily. Next, let's talk about the specifics of our transaction. Going straight to the point, Shi Feng said, "Like I said before, so long as you manage to withstand one hit from me, I will agree to partner with you, Commander Lionheart. However, after we start our cooperation, I'll need your help with something. Of course, I won't have you help me for nothing. In exchange, I'll sell the crystals of souls at 150,000 magic crystals each to Skyflare. How about it? 150,000 each?" Lionheart was slightly tempted. "May I know what you need help with?" Previously, when he offered to purchase the crystals of souls at 200,000 magic crystals each, the price was actually a little too high for Skyflare to bear. However, the crystals of souls were far too important. They would also play a crucial role when Skyflare attempted to conquer other main cities. Hence, he had gone through with the price. Lowering the price to 150,000 magic crystals each would definitely alleviate a lot of Skyflare's burden. Help me kill a boss, Shifeng said, smiling. The reason Shifeng wanted to test Lionheart wasn't just to experiment with the power of his upgraded mana body. He had also wished to see whether Lionheart could withstand the attack of a Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, if he didn't have anyone capable of tanking a hit from a Tier 4 infant dragon, slaying it would be utterly impossible. Since Lionheart clearly met this requirement, combined with the effects of the Heavenly Dragon's breath, challenging an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon was entirely feasible. Kill a boss. Lionheart was a little puzzled. He never thought Shifeng's request would be so simple. Is this boss very strong? Very strong. Not bothering to hide the truth, Shifeng said, it's a Tier 4 infant dragon. A Tier 4 infant dragon? Lionheart gasped at Shifeng's words. Immediately, he thought of something and asked, are you referring to the one Lady Angelica is trying to challenge? That's right. It's that one. Shifeng nodded. Actually, this matter is also beneficial to you as well, Commander Lionheart. After all, Meteorite City's promotion will attract more players and resources to the city. At that time, Skyflare can grow stronger together with the city. Lionheart nodded in agreement. In reality, he too wished for Meteorite City to grow stronger and become an advanced main city. However, the incredibly high difficulty of challenging a Tier 4 infant dragon made him decide to have Skyflare opt out of Angelica Teresa's expedition. After all, Skyflare already had 2 Tier 4 players under its command, and it had yet to stabilize its advantages. If Skyflare eagerly participated in the risky expedition and failed, the adventurer team would definitely lose a lot of its advantages. What do you think, Commander Lionheart? Shifeng asked. Previously, he didn't hold much hope for slaying the Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, a Tier 4 infant dragon was comparable to Tier 5 existences. It was much stronger than even a demon prince. Even though he could use the complete Holy Devour now, it wouldn't make any difference since he couldn't use the technique indefinitely. However, the story would change if Lionheart was present. The fact that Lionheart could survive a Tier 5 attack meant that he could defend against a Tier 4 infant dragon's attack. Okay. After thinking for a while, Lionheart gritted his teeth and agreed to Shifeng's condition. However, Brother Black Flame, as Skyflare has just gained some advantages, we cannot afford to invest everything into helping you. We can send only a 100-man team at most. In response to Lionheart's worries, Shifeng simply chuckled and said, that's already more than enough. In fact, it's fine so long as Skyflare can dispatch its 2 Tier 4 players, let alone a 100-man team. May I know when we will begin the operation? Lionheart asked. Raiding a Tier 4 infant dragon was an important matter. Preparing the necessary manpower and supplies would take a lot of time. We're not in a rush right now. I'm afraid it will still take several days before we can set out, Shifeng said, shaking his head. I'll notify you when the time comes, Commander Lionheart. Challenging a Tier 4 infant dragon with just 3 Tier 4 players would be outright suicide. It wouldn't matter even if they had a large number of Tier 3 players supporting them. Fortunately, the Ancient Gods domain did not require players to search for their legacy lands to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests. So long as he had Lifeless Thorn and the others challenged their promotion quests and some of them succeeded, he would have a much greater chance of success. Alright, if that's the case, I can make more preparations on my side. Lionheart breathed out a sigh of relief at Shifeng's words. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Afterward, Shifeng signed a partnership contract with Lionheart to the effect that Skyflare would purchase crystals of souls from Shifeng at 150,000 magic crystals per crystal and soul water at 30,000 magic crystals per drop. For the first transaction, Skyflare purchased a total of 20 crystals of souls and 50 drops of soul water, the total expenditure amounting to 4.5 million magic crystals. When it came to magic crystals, Skyflare was wealthier than most superpowers operating in the modern gods domain. When the transaction was completed, Shifeng couldn't help his elation. After all, he now had the 8 million magic crystals required to construct the small mobile fortress. Afterward, all he needed to do was collect 2 million pieces of mana ore and 30,000 mana stones. In addition, he also had a chance to raid the Tier 4 Infant Dragon. Leaving the Skyflare Hotel, Sherfeng looked at the additional 5 million magic crystals in his bag and smiled. Now that I have the money, it's about time to have Lifeless Thorn and the others undergo their promotion. Chapter 2778, Semi-Finished Mana Body Meteorite City, Silver Hotel. After Sherfeng received 5 million magic crystals from Skyflare, he returned to the Silver Hotel with Yu Luo. As for the small auction he initially planned to hold, Lionheart had announced to the public that Skyflare would monopolize all of the products. Hence, the commotion over the auction died down quickly. None of Meteorite City's various powers dared to voice their opinions on Skyflare's monopoly. After all, Skyflare was the sole power in the city with 2 Tier 4 combatants under its command. Previously, the powers with Tier 4 combatants still dared to stand up against Skyflare because Lionheart could not easily kill other Tier 4 combatants by himself. However, now that Skyflare's Windchaser was a Tier 4 assassin, it would be a piece of cake for Skyflare to kill any individual Tier 4 combatant. Hence, even the other 2 of the top 3 player forces in Meteorite City decided to tolerate the situation. Not to mention, while the Crystal of Souls could indeed strengthen an individual's soul, the amount of help this improvement could provide in the Tier 4 promotion quest was minuscule. Even if Skyflare obtained all 5 Crystals of Souls, the adventurer team would, at most, increase the number of Tier 4 combatants it had from 2 to 3. Meanwhile, back in his room, Sherfeng promptly took out 75,000 magic crystals and distributed them to Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, Cleansing Whistle, and Yu Luo. Right, each of you take a drop of soul water as well, Sherfeng said as he took out 5 drops of soul water and distributed them. Once you are done collecting the legacy fragments, drink it immediately. Although it isn't as effective as the Crystal of Souls, it can still clear your mind. You should have an easier time learning your legacy skill. In response, Lifeless Thorn and the other Azura members nodded and accepted the soul water. Yu Luo, however, hesitated. She didn't know whether she should accept the soul water, which cost 30,000 magic crystals a drop. Guild Leader Black Flame, this soul water is too valuable. I already feel very indebted to you just for letting me challenge my Tier 4 promotion quest this time. I really cannot accept this soul water, Yu Luo said, rejecting Sherfeng's gift after giving the matter some thought. Heaven's Blade had cooperated with Zero Wing only once. The 2 organizations couldn't even be considered allies. If she accepted this soul water, she would owe Sherfeng a huge favor. In that case, she would have a difficult time explaining herself to Zwei once she returned. However, in response to Yu Luo's rejection, Sherfeng shook his head and said, Miss Yu Luo, you must have misunderstood me. I'm not giving you this soul water for free. I need you to help me with something in the near future. If you reach Tier 4, we'll have a higher chance of success. Help you with something? Yu Luo was a little dazed. That's right. I plan to raid that Tier 4 Infant Dragon. However, Tier 3 players are useless against an Infant Dragon. Only Tier 4 players will matter. Meanwhile, as you've reached the Void Realm already, your control over mana should be excellent. Your concentration should also be only one step away from reaching the Tier 4 standard. With the Soul Water's help, you'll have a better chance of promoting to Tier 4, Sherfeng said, nodding. Hence, this Soul Water is my investment in you. I'm not giving it to you for free, so you don't need to overthink things. The upcoming raid of the Tier 4 Infant Dragon wasn't something Tier 3 players could stick their hands into. Only Tier 4 players could be of help. A Tier 4 healer would be especially useful. Since Sherfeng couldn't guarantee that Yenya would succeed in her Tier 4 promotion quest, having a backup plan would naturally be better. Not to mention, he currently had over 2,000 drops of soul water on hand. He could still afford such a small investment. I understand. If I don't get promoted to Tier 4 this time, I will find a way to pay you back for this soul water, Yu Luo said. With Sherfeng's words, The burden she felt lightened considerably. Truthfully, she would be lying if she said that she did not want the soul water. After all, the Tier 4 promotion quest was no walk in the park. Meteorite City's peak experts demonstrated this point quite well. Among all the peak experts who had challenged their Tier 4 promotion quest, less than 10% succeeded. Not to mention she was slightly weaker than them. However, if she had the soul water's mind-cleansing effect, she would most likely be able to stand on equal footing with the local peak experts. Yu Luo accepted the soul water, a glint of determination appearing in her eyes. This was because this drop of soul water represented not just hope but also a burden. If she completed her Tier 4 promotion quest, then she would be able to repay all of the favors she owed right away. After all, Tier 4 Great Clerics were incredibly rare even in the ancient gods domain, let alone the modern gods domain. You guys can go now. Whether you can get promoted or not will all depend on yourselves now, Shifeng said after Yu Luo accepted the soul water. He then instructed the group of 5, remember, act according to your strengths when choosing your respective Tier 4 skills. There is no need to learn the strongest one. Instead, learn the one you're most proficient at. He did not doubt the ability of the 5 people before him to collect the necessary number of legacy fragments. His only worry was their ability to learn a Tier 4 legacy skill within the allotted time. Afterward, under Yu Luo's lead, Lifeless Thorn and the others departed for Meteorite City's Tier 4 instructors. Now, only Shifeng remained inside the hotel room. Let's hope a few of them can reach Tier 4. If that's the case, we'll have an easier time dealing with that infant dragon. Looking at the group of 5's departing figures, Shifeng inwardly celebrated the fact that he managed to get through his Tier 4 promotion quest previously. Immediately afterward, he sensed the state of his mana body and smiled. It's about time I grinded for some levels. If I don't get used to this mana body, I might cause the quest to fail. After unlocking his mana body to a 110% completion rate, he had not had an opportunity to get used to it properly. His duel with Lionheart didn't prove anything. After all, mana bodies provided all-around improvements to players. There was no way he could determine all of these improvements just by putting all his strength into one attack. In fact, he couldn't even tell if his overall combat power had improved or not through his duel with Lionheart. This was because the mana body's improvement mainly led to subtle improvements in various aspects. On the surface, it was impossible to tell if his improved mana body had brought any changes to his overall combat power. After all, his basic attributes remained the same as before. Right now, the only obvious improvements were in the density of his mana, his control over mana, his physique, and his 5 senses. During his fight with Lionheart, he had only proven that the improvement of his mana body had positive effects on his mana techniques. Even then, he still wasn't clear how the improvement had triggered such a change. Needless to say, he was even more clueless about the other benefits his improved mana body had to offer. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. If he wished to fully utilize his new mana body and maximize his combat power, he would need to readapt to his mana body. It was akin to learning a new skill or spell. He would need to put in a lot of time and effort into adapting and training. Only after he could make use of his mana body at an instinctive level could he be considered to have truly adapted to it. At this point, his mana body could only be considered a semi-finished product. Next, he would have to explore his mana body thoroughly. Shifeng drank a drop of soul water, recovering some of the concentration he had expended executing Holy Devour. He then put on his black cloak and silently departed from Meteorite City. After taking a look at the system map, he took to the skies and made his way toward the anti-magic volcano, a level 135 neutral map located a distance from Meteorite City. From start to end, nobody in Meteorite City was aware that he had left the city. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.